All right, hey folks. I did want to sit down and have a discussion slash interview with a good friend of mine, Vince, which all of you are going to be very, very familiar with. Of course, he's been a commentator in CSGO for several years now. You've seen him recently at IEM Katowice. He's also been at several other big events, and he's also been kind of a regular in the DreamHack Open circuit, as well as a few other minors and things like that involved. Also is a streamer, also occasionally does some YouTube content. And yeah, so I wanted to have him on to talk to him a little bit about himself, his career, and then also kind of have some discussions about just things that maybe you folks would be interested in about commentary, about what it's like to be an esports commentator, maybe particularly in CSGO, some of the things that we deal with, some of the things that we enjoy, some of the things that are hard, and maybe just kind of give you some insight kind of behind the scenes of what it's like to be a commentator, so to speak. And it's actually a little bit odd timing because I know that, Vince, you had just done an interview with Richard Lewis over at the Rivalry channel, which I will link below, and I highly recommend everyone check it out because I feel like it didn't get enough attention. I feel like people would really be interested to hear that, and so I want to kind of, throw some light on that again. And in that video, you kind of talked about your history on how you got into Counter-Strike and how you got into the esports in general, and you talked about a couple other topics that were quite interesting. But we had already kind of planned to do an interview before you did that one a long, long time ago, but actually, funny enough, the reason why it didn't happen was because you actually stepped away from casting for a while. We were actually going to do this talk last year, but then you kind of took some time off. You've come back now, and we're talking about doing it again. You did the Richard interview, and that's all fine because I think that this will just be now both combined will be like a more complete picture of you. And I'll try to avoid some of the things that you guys already discussed. Try to hit on some topics that you didn't. That way, we get a little bit more out of it. So, Vince, first off, how I want to kick this interview off is, again, you already talked to Richard Lewis about how you got into commentating, COD 4 and a little bit of League of Legends. And then you got into CSGO because you enjoyed the game, you enjoyed playing it, and so you kind of got into it, did some smaller stuff in the UK scene, eventually got into some different, online casting and things of that nature. But I feel like where you really kind of started, at least to me, when I first kind of became aware of you, was DreamHack Open Stockholm, which is basically the qualifier for DreamHack Cluj-Napoca. And this was actually a pretty big event. You were casting alongside the Anderson Similar duo. Sadakis was there. DDK was there. This is where Yanko is actually starting to get his start as well as an analyst, coming over from an observer. And there's a few other names that people recognize at this event as well. And so this kind of kickstarted, at least for me, you becoming a regular of DreamHack events, particularly in the open circuit. And then, eventually down the line, some of your biggest gigs were with them at DreamHack Masters. So how important was it to get this type of consistency with the company and be able to kind of get your foot in the door and kind of regularly get out there on the airwaves?
Yeah, I mean, it was huge. It was everything really, because I'd done an event earlier that year for Gfinity Spring Invitational, I think it was, when I got a chance to cast with Semler. And I think that was around like March, April sort of time, fairly early on in the year. And then it was at the end, as you said, where you had the Open Stockholm event, which I think was like September, maybe something like that. So there was a long way in between the two of them, where I was basically in the wilderness just casting online CS, like tier 3, tier 4, tier 5 CS. So yeah, I mean, this was a massive event for me, getting to cast with all of these huge names. And as you say, Yanko, I think it was his first event as well, as an actual talent rather than just observing, which is what he did before.
I think he had some guest spots maybe when he was mainly observing, but would maybe come on for like a segment to kind of introduce himself to doing it. But I think this is like his first like full gig as an analyst, yeah.
Right, yeah. I think this is his first like full swing and seeing how it would go. And it was a really cool experience. I got to meet all of these huge names, and they're all super down to earth and chill and very easy to work with. And I just got along with them all so well. And plus, I'd already worked with DreamHack for League of Legends, so I had kind of like a relationship with DreamHack. But obviously, this is where they were hiring through Mark Winther, whereas before I dealt with other people for League. So this was opening a new relationship up with the same company. And as he said, this went on to a whole bunch of DreamHack Open events, which is really what I was mainly doing with. I think I did an early Malmo event in as well, like 2016. But this was really the start. Without this event, I probably would have been waiting another 6+ months before I got any kind of opportunity at a higher level tournament.
Yeah, the reason why I asked this question is later on, I think we're going to have a little bit of a talk about the dichotomy of being able to get opportunities and then being in the wilderness and, establishing consistency, but then kind of dealing with the interim. And I think that's kind of a big topic that people don't really think about when you think about, some of the talent that we have in CSGO. We have a lot of talented people, but not that many spots to go around sometimes. And so there is definitely these sitting and waiting periods where you're kind of twiddling your thumbs and you want to grind, you're ready to go, you're prepared. We've all been in this boat, like pretty much all of us, that's like below the three big duos and some of the main analysts, is that you're always hungry, but sometimes opportunities just aren't there. So I think that's a great discussion we can talk about a little bit later, because, you know, after this whole thing at DreamHack, you kind of regularly became a part of DreamHack Open. I know I also saw you, that's where we met, was actually at CEVO in early 2016. And then, like you said, you did DreamHack Open for the bulk of that year, 2016. And this is back when DreamHack Open had a lot of the top teams. People might not remember that DreamHack Open has kind of maybe slid down the totem pole a little bit as far as prestige, because of how busy the calendar has gotten and, you know, how much the prize money has jumped up over the years. But back then, DreamHack Open would have like your Virtus Pro, your Luminosity, the Brazilian team, Navi, Astralis, Dignitas. Like, these were all really, really big Open events, and you were consistently at these events. And then, yeah, you did do DreamHack Masters Malmo, if I'm not mistaken, right around the same time period. So it's like kind of you like making this natural progression, you know, going through the Opens, and now you're at a Masters, a really big tournament. It seemed like you made so much growth in this 6 to 7 month period in 2016. So how was this experience, you know, going from getting your start with DreamHack to now really establishing a relationship and like making this progression?
I think it gave me a lot of opportunities to take the exposure and try and do my absolute best to turn people's heads, not just community members, but organizers as well out there, to say, okay, this is someone that we can work with, making sure that I was as easy to work with as possible for these casters, because obviously at this time, as I still am to an extent, you're getting hired alone. It's how do you fit with other people? How does your personality sort of clash or mesh with other people as well? So I got a chance to work with Henry back at Leipzig, which is the, you know, the Kia BRU Serious play that a lot of people will quote back to me even now. And it was just a really good opportunity to work with a bunch of different casters, to take their different ways of commentating, their different approaches, their different sort of intricacies, and mesh them together and try my best to be easy to work with, because I knew that in terms of getting a duo was very unlikely back then. I think this is at the point where Sadakis was aiming to do more hosting roles, because I think that's where Richard had his issues with DreamHack. And there was maybe like an air of, could Henry and I become a duo when Sadakis does a bunch of the hosting? But I think in Henry's eyes, Sadakis was always the wise decision, and I absolutely understand why. They complement each other so well. But there were like moments there and glimpses of, could this turn into something more? You know, it's the imaginary or the invisible brass rings that are out there that you're just trying to claw onto as best as you can, and they kind of slip out of your fingers.
Say, this was also a time period, if I'm not mistaken, where you and Moses could have been a thing, because Anders and Simler are very much a duo, and you and Moses did work together at that Malmo event that we've mentioned when I asked the question. And there was this thought, because I know Moses never really wanted to be an analyst. He kind of just did it because the opportunities were there and it made sense. But I feel like his heart was always really in commentary, just from talking to him personally and kind of understanding his interests and his passions. And I know that you two worked well together at Malmo. You kind of naturally, you know, fit, you know, you being a play-by-play, Moses, that former professional player with a lot of knowledge of the game. And so I feel like there was a lot of almost, so to speak, when it comes to duoing around this time period. Like you and Launders also was an almost.
Yep.
So kind of talk to me about, you know, how you were maneuvering around all these different possibilities during this time period.
Yeah, it kind of came off the back of the same mentality that I said earlier, with just trying my best to accompany as many different styles as I can, and to shine the light on the other caster and try and make them as comfortable and feel like they were getting a bunch out of the commentating as well. It's just kind of my natural style, really. I want to make the broadcast overall as good as I possibly can. And if that means I take more of a back step and I try and shine the light on the other person, then so be it. I don't mind doing that at all. For me, it's not trying to one-up my co-caster. It's trying to make the cast as good as it physically can be. I think that's a stumbling block that a lot of newer commentators fall into, where they try and look the better commentator or the more funny or whatever. It just kind of overshadows the overall product, which is a terrible decision to do. So I think when, you know, you had Moses and then Henry and Launders, yeah, there were a lot of maybes, ifs, and buts, and it was kind of a bit of unfortunate timing. I think this is around the time when Moses took on the E-League role. Was just after Malmo, so that kind of killed that dead in the water. I'm not sure if Moses even wanted a duo anyway, to be honest. It never really got that far. Launders, this is after his Yahoo thing, where he was basically stuck in NA. And couldn't travel anywhere, and so that was dead in the water. So yeah, there's a lot of maybes, ifs, and buts, but there's no guarantee that even if those things hadn't have happened, the duo would have worked, because one thing that's definitely held me back, and I'll be completely transparent with that and realistic, is that because of my health and not being able to travel a lot, that can be a turnoff to these guys that want to grind as many events as possible and are also based in NA. It's a bit unreasonable for me to expect, well, if we're going to duo, you have to take it on my terms in Europe, and I can't go across to NA or China or anywhere like that. That's pretty unreasonable. So I'm not even sure if those duos would have worked anyway. But yeah, the timing was just slightly off.
Yeah, definitely, always can be hard timing. And obviously health is something that we're going to talk about a little bit as well, I think, in some of the discussions we're going to have a little bit later on. So definitely want to kind of take note of that. I know something you talked a lot about with Richard as well. I think that's something you've been very transparent about, like in your vlogs and with your stream and things of that nature. I feel like everyone's already kind of had a pretty good idea about that. But
Sure.
What I wanted to get to is, rolling into 2017, this is where me and you duoed a lot for several different DreamHack Open events. We did the B stream together for DreamHack Masters Malmo as well. So this was a pretty consistent run, and you were doing some other stuff as well, kind of early into 2017 as well into the mid-year. And then you started to land some really big gigs at the end of the year. Like, you started getting some really opportunities with Blast, EPL Season 6 finals to end the year, though this was kind of by chance, I guess. Pansy couldn't make this one due to illness, I think it was. And so you filled in to kind of resync up with Moses, someone you had to work with in the past, if I'm not mistaken. And so it did seem like you were still quite consistent, but it also did feel like, the natural progression kind of stopped and almost a plateau kind of starts to happen. I feel like this happens to a lot of different people that, aren't amongst like the three big duos or some of the most elite tier analysts, that sometimes this kind of plateau period can happen where you feel like you have been making progress, but now all of a sudden it's been halted. And while you're happy for maybe the consistency, you do still have that hunger to keep growing, and it's not happening. So I guess kind of what I wanted to ask is, how did you deal with that throughout 2017? Like, how did you deal with this aspect of being appreciative and happy that you get to work and that things are consistent, but that, you kind of hit a little bit of a plateau period?
It's a rough one, because on the one hand, I felt like I had so much more to offer and wasn't hitting my stride even remotely. On the other, I'm being told from other casters and organizers, like, you're doing everything great, we really love working with you, and the future's yours if you want it, and all these kinds of things. And then suddenly things dry up, and you're not sure why, and you're asking questions, but you're not really getting any answers for it. You're hitting dead end after dead end, and you're just kind of like, well, is this it? Like, am I destined to be a caster that works like 3 times a year, and that's pretty much it, Because 2016 to 2017, early on, I was grinding really hard, actually. I was trying to push my health to its limits, and it definitely affected me in a very bad way health-wise, but I was working a hell of a lot. But yeah, that was really where things started to dry up a little bit. I got very fortunate / it was unlucky for Pansy. She got food poisoning, which is why I ended up going to EPL, as you said correctly, to cast with Moses. And that was 3 events back-to-back at the end of 2017. So I had like this mid-portion 2017 was quite barren, and it ended with an explosion of Blast into DreamHack Winter into EPL. I didn't expect to do EPL. That was 3.5 weeks consistently on the road working event after event.
Didn't you find out about it like as you were leaving Winter, basically? Yeah. And you had like a few days notice, right?
Yeah, I think it was just before I did the finals of DreamHack Winter. I got a message from Joe that was like, look, Lauren's too sick. And I knew she was sick because she wasn't able to cast much.
And for clarification, he means Joe Miller, who's kind of ahead of talent for ESL.
Yeah, that's right. Okay. Who obviously in the past had also done a bunch of commentating in different games like League and CS and stuff in previous years.
I think you sound similar, by the way. It's like a funny joke I've always... Not a joke, but like a comment I've already made. Didn't you come from a similar region of England, Joe Miller?
I think Joe's from like Yorkshire-ish, which is... It isn't that far away from where I'm from. We're both from the north, so there are definitely similarities.
Okay.
But yeah, I mean, he just told me Lauren can't make it, so would you possibly be able to get across there? It was around my birthday as well. I actually worked my birthday, and I had a bunch of family things planned, so I had to cancel all of those, and that caused issues. But I was like, screw it. This is a chance. This is an opportunity for me to work another top-tier event. At this stage, I think the only top-tier event I'd worked beforehand was Malmo, and that was in early 2016. So that was a year and a half in between. Because Blast, it was top-tier, but it was 3 streams going on at the same time, and I was always on the C stream. So, the viewership wasn't fantastic. So I was like, yes, I'm going for this, throw caution to the wind, let's do it. I was incredibly burnt out, but it was a really cool experience. But then after that, things started to slow down quite a bit until I think around midway through 2018, which is where Marseille and Stockholm came in.
Yeah, that's exactly where I was headed to
sketchy.
next. Yeah.
Hmm.
That's what I was heading to next. Is like you did kind of have some momentum with those big events at the end of the year, and then you went to Marseille, which is kind of mid-year, maybe like a little bit earlier than mid-year, but it was definitely not like January of the year, right? So
Yeah.
it took a little bit to get there. And then you did do Stockholm more towards the end of the year. So this did seem like you were finding yourself into the tier 1 events, but. And I don't mean this to be like rude, and I hope people didn't think that earlier when I said that you plateaued. I don't mean like your talent plateaued. You're obviously very talented, but I just meant the amount of events you were attending had hit a plateau, or the amount of tier 1 events had plateaued. That's just a matter of fact, not a matter of your ability. So I hope people can tell the difference. And I feel like this kind of continues on in 2018. And then the question I want to ask now, and again, this is a little bit of a tough one, and hopefully people don't react harshly to the question, but it's like, how does it feel to keep only getting to tier 1 events because someone else couldn't go, right? Does that weigh on you? Like, I mean, think about it. It was Pansy with the illness at EPL. Then it was the whole situation with Staticist that everyone already knows about. Not going to get into that for Marseille. Yeah. And that was basically the case for Stockholm too, I guess. It was very much the same story about CEVO not going to be hired because of the whole situation that he had with DreamHack Masters. I'm not sure if it had kind of alleviated at that point or not, or if DreamHack was still not wanting to work with him just yet. So does that weigh on you, that idea?
It does, because in a way you don't feel fully accepted or embraced. It's kind of like you're only there because other people aren't, as opposed to you're there because you were on the top of our list, right? On a short list, you were third. Whereas right now, I'm very aware that it's the same with the major. Like, obviously, Katowice. I'm there because Anders had his second child born, and I think Pansy was already tied up with PUBG content or something, was my understanding. So if either of those are available, I know I'm not going to the major. It really is that simple. And yes, it does weigh on you. You start to doubt, like, am I good enough? I've been around for long enough. I feel like when I've had opportunities, I've taken them. I'm always very inward looking with my casting, and I'm never fully happy with it. I always have things that I want to improve on, but I feel like I've done a good enough job to deserve to be in those positions.
Sure.
But yeah, I mean, it definitely is something that you question, and I still do, to be honest with you. I think had I have not been fortunate with other people's misfortunes, would I be in a position where I'd casted any other tier 1 events other than Malmo back in 2016? And the answer is probably not.
Yeah, I think there's like a positive way to look at this too, though, because I realize that we're kind of hitting a little bit of a darker place. But the whole point of this discussion, by the way, was to ask the hard questions and was to have those talks and give people that insight into the things that we go through mentally. You'll notice I've hit like a different theme with every question. We're going to come back to each of them and discuss the themes further. I kind of place the questions in this way. So with this, the theme is this idea that, you're kind of the alternate. But the positive spin to that, at least for me, and kind of what I told you, because, me and you are very close. We talk all the time, and we've definitely had our heart-to-hearts about things that we've dealt with, in our lives, particularly professionally. And it's one of those things where at least you know that you're their next choice, which means you're still really high up in the rankings, so to speak, right? The fact that you are the next choice for ESL or DreamHack for their tier 1 events once, one of the options from the big duos are not available or something like that, that you seem always next in line. So in that regard, it does seem like the positive spin is that you've at least firmly established yourself, for now at least, as, I guess, like a member of the 4th duo, so to speak, right? I mean, obviously, Scrawny and Launders are on their way up, it seems like. You have like Harry and Hugo working together. But other than that, there really is no solidified duos. And I guess the point is you don't really have one either, though. But still, your name amongst commentators is very much like right after the 3 big duos that everyone knows and loves. Like, your name is right there. In some cases, maybe people even would give you the nod to some of them or something like that. I'm not really sure. I guess it's just up to their personal opinion. But certainly your skill set, objectively, is right at that same level, which is why when you do go to the major, when you do get those opportunities, people receive you very well, and you do a really good job. So does that help at all? I guess is like the point I'm trying to make. Like, does that at least kind of somewhat help numb maybe the pain of some of the things that you've described?
Oh, I mean, I'm super grateful and always try to look at the positive sides of things, for sure. And I think, yeah, it's easy to look at it in terms of like, am I good enough? And then think, well, look, they're still coming to you. It's not like you're getting passed up for all these events and they're going down a list of like 5 people before you. Like, you are next in line, as you said. So, I mean, it is great in one aspect that, because I've shown time and time again over the years, you've mentioned the previous duos that nearly clicked or maybe didn't nearly click, and all the different casters I work with. I think I've got a bit of a reputation in terms of organizers and other casters as being able to work with anybody. And that's not a bad thing, being versatile, adaptive, and being able to fit in. The downside, though, is, and you just mentioned this yourself, when it comes to who is that next duo below the top 3, I think in a strange way, I'm like not even in a debate, because I'm kind of like, if people view me as tier 1 or tier 2 or whatever, I'm like that, but 2.0, because I'm basically alone, or at least I have been. And obviously, we're going to try and make a duo work as we have in the past. But at the same time, when it comes to hiring, spoiler alert, yeah. When it comes to hiring casters for these big events, if they have to dip down, I'm not seen as a duo right now. I'm seen as just Vince. And in some ways that's empowering, and in some ways that's kind of imprisoning. You know? It's a weird balancing act. You're on this tightrope constantly as a freelancer where you don't really know where you stand. But there's definitely positives, no doubt. As I said before, would I have been at those tier 1 events if all the pieces of the puzzle were in place? Probably not. But because I was on my own and deemed to be good enough to work with anybody, I still got hired, and that's awesome. That's obviously a huge plus. Yeah,
so duoing is definitely going to be another theme we're going to hit. I asked this question to kind of introduce that, and I want to come back to a little bit later about the whole duoing aspect. But another thing I'll say is that you at least were also, if you weren't at the main event, it seems like you're always on the remote stream for Masters, which they only bring 2 duos on site, where most events have like maybe 3 duos, although I guess this last major only had 2, but it's usually like 2 or 3 duos, and if there's a 3rd duo, it's done remotely for DreamHack Masters. So even though you're not physically there, you're still kind of a big part of at least the group stage of an event, and so that is one of those things where it's like you're technically a part of it, but it doesn't quite feel the same, but at least you're getting to cast big games with the good teams, and you're announced alongside all the other talent, and it feels as close as it can be to being there without actually being there, right? At least you play a part in it. So does that help as well? The fact that at least you can kind of say to yourself that, hey, I have been pretty much always a part of DreamHack Masters, right? One way or the other.
Yes, I think the only time I wasn't was the Las Vegas one, because I don't think they had a B stream.
They did not,
event, if memory serves me correctly. But other than that, I think I've been a part of all the Masters in some way, shape, or form. And that is really cool. I was at the very first one. It was their baby, and I know how much it meant to them. And it's a really cool feeling to be involved with so many opens. I feel like I've got a very close relationship with DreamHack. To be a part of all of those is amazing. And yeah, I mean, look, I love commentating. I love the craft of it. I love everything there is about casting itself. When you're on the server, you've got the headphones on, you're ready to go. Absolutely adore that element of commentating. So if I have the chance to be at home and get paid, obviously it's less, but still get paid, and not necessarily be in front of the crowd, which sucks, but if I still have a chance to be a part of it, that's still awesome. And it gives me a chance to, as you say, like still get the exposure of being on the talent call outs and still being a part of a tier 1 event, even if it is more on the periphery as opposed to the, actual in the trenches, as it were, of being at the event itself.
Right. So the next thing I wanted to hit is something that you already did kind of talk about with Richard Lewis. So this is kind of like one of the times we're actually going to overlap a little bit between that interview and this one, but I felt like it was an important enough topic to where it felt just right to still have it in this one. And that is, of course, the concept of that you had this really cool into 2018 because you did both DreamHack Masters events. And it seemed like, you were on that same trajectory. Maybe you would consider it a plateau, but you could also consider it like progress made, at least like you're physically attending tier 1 events. Like if you add late 2017 to mid 2018, you had a run of way more tier 1 events than probably any other point in your career. So it did almost kind of feel like progress a bit, even if there was some conditionals on it, kind of coming in and filling in for other people. It did still feel like you were getting some real momentum. Your brand was building. You were definitely becoming a more notable name in the scene. People were being introduced to you more as the game's growing, and more people are coming in. They're being introduced to you now because you're out there more regularly. And then kind of, maybe not out of nowhere to me, because me and you had obviously talked quite a lot, but out of nowhere to probably a lot of people in the community who had just witnessed you have this kind of rise and consistency at being at big events, you stopped. You kind of, I guess, I almost think that in the video, you kind of said that you were wanting to kind of end it on a high note, so to speak. Like you kind of wanted to just be happy with how things went at Stockholm. You knew you gave it your all. You did a great job, and you knew that you were dealing with some things that were private, but certainly were kind of holding you back that you needed to address. And while you didn't flat out say, I retired, you did basically say you were taking an indefinite break, which indefinite is a very vague word. It's one of those words where it's like, it could mean forever, it could mean permanently, but it's indefinite, it's indefinable, so it could literally be, I'll be back tomorrow, right? Like, theoretically, you could end an indefinite break the very next day, although that would certainly look quite odd, because I think people expect that it'll last a while, if not permanently, when you use the word indefinite. So obviously, some of the things that revolve around this decision are things that you're probably going to keep close to your chest and not really want to share. But yeah, it was definitely a shocker. I knew that you were toying with the idea, but I didn't think that you'd actually do it. I felt like since you had just done Stockholm and it went well, that would maybe be that extra bit of gas that would keep you going. But in reality, it had like kind of a different effect. How hard was it to make this decision, and do you regret it at all? I mean, obviously you're back now, but I'm just saying, like, at the time, looking back, do you think it was the wrong choice?
To answer how difficult was it, I'd been going through like a really hellish year or two with family issues and family members passing away and being diagnosed with all kinds of horrible shit, dealing with my own health problems as well. I had friends that passed away. Just like, it had been a particularly bad year, and the older you get, obviously this sort of stuff's going to catch up inevitably. No one lives forever. And there was a lot of responsibility that was in my life behind the scenes that very, very few people know about, trying to look after people, and it just got a bit too much. And in my head, it wasn't just one thing, it was like hundreds of things piled on top of each other. And I felt like the only way out to keep my sanity was to take a step back from casting. As you said, indefinitely. Obviously, it was reported like I'd quit forever and I didn't want to ever cast again, all this sort of stuff, which wasn't the case in the video that I made. I think that was misreported, to be completely honest. But I did, and I own up to what the video that I made, and I definitely regret it. And I regretted it probably just a month or two after I made the video, because what I didn't realize at the time, and because I was in such a desperate place, was that commentating and having something to aim towards and trying to get to that top level and one day cast at more majors. Obviously, at this stage, I didn't know that Face It was around the corner. I didn't know the Katowice would have me either. I realized that I had unfinished business with casting, that I wanted to achieve so much more, and I knew that I could achieve so much more if I put my mind to it. So I was sat there, and I remember that Blast had a couple of events. I think one was in Lisbon, although the whole thing was kind of like a blur to me at the time. And I was sat there watching, and I was like, I feel like I should be there. You know, I feel like I could easily be casting this event right now and casting my heart out, and I have so much more to offer the community. And I just felt like that something wasn't finished, and I needed to turn it back around and get back on that path again. Right. So was it a mistake? 100% yes. It came from a very dark place. It came from a place that I thought there was an alternative, right? Because I wasn't thinking clearly. And yeah, 100%, if I could go back in time, I wouldn't have made the choice. But that's life, isn't it?
But do you think it maybe was helpful to have taken that break? Like, you say that you regret it and that it was a mistake, but is it not maybe it was a good decision because it kind of helped you take a break and kind of cool off and kind of deal with personal things, and then also let you reassess your career and then find out how much it truly meant to you? Like, I almost feel like in that way it can almost be considered kind of a blessing in disguise. Is there some element of that to it?
Yeah, I guess, you know, as the cliche goes, you don't know what you've got till you lost it. I guess that comes up a lot, and that certainly rang true for me. Yeah, I think maybe it did help in the respect that I got a bit of time to clear my mind and sort of dwell on it a little bit more, and I started to get into better mentality in terms of like exercise and losing weight and all these kinds of things, and that my head was just such a messy place. And I think one thing that people won't realize unless you've been on the medication before yourself is blood pressure meds really screw with your entire body. And I can't fully explain how it makes you feel. It's like you're foggy in your head 24/7. And that definitely had some impact on it as well. I was just in a terrible place mentally and physically. But yeah, I mean, maybe it did help to a degree. I think the timing was poor as well, though, because it was just coming up to the end of the year. So I'd have had time off anyway around Christmas and January, more than likely. But allowing myself to fully back off and, in all honesty, to see the incredible reaction from the community and the love and the support and the very kind words meant a great deal to me. It was never intended that way. I didn't think anyone would really care, to be honest. I thought it would just be like, okay, cool, see you later, best of luck. But especially when I was at Face It and I was doing the quarterfinals between Hellraisers and Liquid, the reception I got from the crowd in London was like, I don't know. I don't know how I managed to get through that game because I was really emotional while casting.
Oh, I
Even
can imagine.
thinking about it, like, kind of makes me a bit emotional now. It's just
Yeah.
like, for me, that reception was just so sort of affirming that maybe I had been accepted a little bit more with casting, and you know, my previous notions about kind of being swept under the rug and being overlooked time and time again, maybe that didn't have as much element to truth to it to what I thought originally. So yeah, I mean, I was sat there basically and realized in around December, yeah, I've made a huge mistake here, and I need to remedy this as soon as I possibly can. Because the thing is, with a decision like that, when you make that announcement, a lot of organizers take note and they're like, okay, well, we won't bother asking him again.
Yeah, right,
that.
exactly.
And so I wanted to make sure that I corrected that problem as soon as I possibly could. I knew there'd be a backlash. I knew some people would see it as like tension seeking, whatever. I just had to think, whatever. Like, people can think what they want. I know the truth. And that's what matters to me the most. So mid-December, I sat down. It was a really hard video to make, but I was like, look, you're going to take this on the chin. You fucked up. You own up to it, and you remedy this. You make the video and say that you'll be coming back at some stage.
Right.
So I just did it.
Yeah. I have a quick question, because you've already kind of mentioned the Face It major and coming in. Obviously, I'm going to have more questions. It's a damn interview and discussion, so fucking clearly. But I just realized how dumb that sounded. Like yeah, come on, then. Come on, then. Of course. But no. But no, what I wanted to ask is, if you had not have gotten the opportunity to cast the Face It major, that quarterfinal, like that was kind of just like a send off for your retirement almost. It felt like not really retirement, but you get my point. Like, it felt like that's what James was kind of doing when he invited you, was to kind of give you like one last hurrah, not make Stockholm your last hurrah, but like let you be a part of a major, something you had been chasing after for so long that drove you, that you thought maybe you would never get to. And then he's like, you know what, like, let me give that opportunity to you. You've earned it, you know, before you maybe go away forever or what have you. Do you think that if you had not have done that, and you hadn't had that feeling of the crowd reception and that feeling of being back out again, do you think that maybe you still wouldn't have returned? Like, do you think you wouldn't have come back? Because, you know, I know you mentioned that you had watched Lisbon from home, and that kind of drove you already. So I was just kind of wondering how much did the Face It major factor into your decision to come back?
I think I still would have came back.
Okay.
But that definitely gave me more inspiration and motivation to readdress the conversation earlier than I think I would have otherwise. I probably have let it go on for a few more months before I came to that bridge. I feel like what would have ended up happening is, I don't know if I'd have got offered the Katowice anyway. I doubt I would have. But once Katowice had came and gone, I think that would have been the moment where I was like, I really need to get back on the horse here and you know, really pedal forward. So I think I would have came back anyway, but the Face It major, I'll always be very, very grateful and appreciative to James for having me over there and reaching out and contacting me. But I certainly think that was a big kick up the backside, you know, towards going back in a bit earlier than I originally anticipated.
Yeah. So I have like one last question basically before we get into some discussion of some of the themes we've already kind of introduced, because I kind of wanted to kind of set the scene before we started having some discussion. And the last thing I wanted to ask you about was, you know, IEM Katowice 2019, you being fully part of a major all the way through, casting a semifinals match and a quarterfinals match, you know, being a part of half the group stage games essentially through both challengers and legends. This is something you've been chasing after since you started casting CSGO, you know, 4 years ago, basically. This has probably always been the end goal for you, is to get there and have that chance. Now that you've had this chance, a couple of sub questions about IEM Katowice. So first off, what was the experience like finally getting that opportunity you have been chasing after for so many years?
Surreal is probably the best word that I could use to describe it, because here I was, I made the I'll return video, and I said that I planned to come back around summer. Never expected to get invited to IEM Katowice, so I thought I'd just be a part of the No Majors Club, maybe for a few games if Richard wanted me in, and that would be about it.
Mm-hmm.
And then I got the offer, and it absolutely blew me away. And of course, I'd have been a moron to say no to it, so I was just accepted instantly. Getting out there, though, I think it took me until 4 or 5 games in to believe that I was actually casting at a major all the way through. You know, it was like a real pinch myself sort of moment. It was grueling, very hard work. Obviously, there was only 2 casting pairs, although some of the analysts kind of chipped in and helped us out with Machine and Stunner as well. But it was a lot of work, you know, long days, a lot of time casting. It was great to get a chance to work with Moses again. What some people forgot, though, that we're mentioning, like, oh, he doesn't have as good synergy with Anders. We hadn't casted together since the EPL Udensa.
Right.
And before that, I'd only casted together at Malmo. So it's only our third cast ever together. And we're at a major. And I think we did a pretty solid job, all things considered. But it was just incredibly surreal. I was so appreciative and so thankful to be a part of it, obviously exhausted at the end. But I also had, for the first time in my life, like post-event depression. I never really struggled with that before.
Yeah, it's something I want to talk about later.
Yeah, I know that it's something that you deal with as well from time to time.
Like everyone does.
Yeah, I feel like a lot of people do. And I hadn't really had it before because it's not that I wasn't grateful to be there or wanted to just rush home, but because I'm quite an introverted person, I just needed time to myself and to decompress. And so by the end of an event, I was looking forward to going home, being in my own bed, being able to play on my computer and stream and all these things that you can't do when you're away for 2 or 3 weeks in a row.
Sure.
But at the end of the major, I was just sat there and I was like, I kind of want another week or two.
Yeah, of course.
You know what I mean? And it was a very odd feeling. So overall, it was an amazing experience. I'm so grateful to have been a part of it. And I feel like I've still got that drive and motivation to do it again because of something we talked about before, which is I know I was only there because Anders and Pansy couldn't make it. I feel like in my head, I want to get to a major where I'm invited like as part of a duo, or I'm invited there. Not necessarily in front of other people because it makes it sound like I'm, ruining other people's work or anything, but you get what I mean, right? Like more of a priority. Mm-hmm. Like they want me there like towards the top of the list rather than the very bottom of it. I think after Katowice, I had sort of a heart-to-heart with myself actually traveling back when I was trying to assess how the event went, and I just thought to myself, screw all of that shit. You got there, you casted, you did your best, you did a good job. So going forward, now you have to stop thinking in that way. If you do get hired as like a last person in, you just do the best with the opportunity you're given. You don't think about anything else. You just get your head down and you plow through it. So that's really, I'm trying to change my mentality in that way.
Gotcha. So we're going to now use the rest of this to have more of a little bit of a discussion back and forth between us rather than kind of just the interview style, because basically we've introduced a bunch of themes to that interview that surround your career, but I think also apply to virtually anyone in our similar position to us, that I think we can kind of, tackle with and give some insight to the community that are interested in some of the things that we deal with and think about and kind of work through, as we get on that grind and try to be the best that we can be and move up the ladder and be consistent with our work and try to get to bigger events. And, it's just natural to want to have that progression and that growth and to get better and be considered better and grow your brand and all that good stuff. And so there's several different, themes that kind of came out of that I'd like to discuss. And one of them is I kind of want to quickly brush on this idea of health and travel and things of that nature, because obviously this is something that everyone in esports deals with, traveling a lot, neglecting your health if it's harder to diet or get to a gym or something, depending on your travel arrangements, stuff like that. And there's something you've obviously dealt with on like a really major scale that you've kind of talked about on the Richard Lewis interview and some of your own content. And I think everyone, at least to a minor degree, has dealt with this. I had like massive GI tract issues that many people don't even know about. That I dealt with last year, where I had like a colon cancer scare for a little bit there. Turned out not to be, so that was definitely great news, but it was certainly, looking rough for a minute there. So we all kind of deal with this. How do you mentally manage this concept of like, you have these polar things happening where like, you need to travel and grind to work your way up, but the cost of that, and sometimes you kind of either have to hold yourself back due to your own health limitations, or you might fall into the trap of maybe you could do it, but you hold yourself back mentally from doing it because you're scared that maybe this is going to come up. So I guess kind of how does this kind of affect you?
It's incredibly frustrating because, I mean, in 2016, 2017, I knew I had issues, and the doctor, I saw multiple doctors, but the main doctor that I was seeing was like, you absolutely cannot travel this much. Otherwise, you severely have a chance of like dropping dead, having a heart attack. And in my head, I just thought, fuck it, I don't care. Like, I'm not scared of death. I mean, I'm still not. It like the way you die, obviously, is a bit more frightening. But I mean, I pretty much just accepted at that stage that I was going to do everything I could to move heaven and earth to grind myself into a position where I could be in contention for majors, I could be in contention for tier 1 events. But yeah, I mean, I'm here because of my own doing. Like, it's no one else's fault. When people think I'm crying for attention or sympathy, absolutely not. I've always been very straightforward and said that I'm overweight and I have the issues I have because of my own doing. I'm not looking after myself and being an idiot. And the reason I've made these videos is to try and steer other people away that are maybe younger, because a lot of people that watch my content or watch CS generally are younger. They're like teenage years, early 20s, to get away from all of that lifestyle and try and fix themselves before it's too late. That's why I make the videos. I don't enjoy putting myself up there to be ridiculed, and you know, it's very embarrassing for me that I've got into this shape. So I mean, I think frustration is the main thing. Is you're constantly trying to balance, can I do this event with the travel? Is this going to wipe me out for 2 or 3 weeks afterwards? Am I going to be severely sick? Am I going to have like immune system problems? Is my blood medication or blood pressure medication going to absolutely wreck me to a point where I can't think straight on broadcasting days? I mean, there's so many different elements of it that always come into play. But I guess when it comes down to it, I'm doing something I love, and I just want to try my best to maintain a certain amount of relevancy, because it's very important in commentating and just general talent work for CS or any other esport. And that for me is the scary factor. And I think this is something a lot of top tier casters deal with, and why they take so many events is because they're scared, will I become irrelevant? Will people replace me? So in my position, I haven't even reached that level. I'm thinking, well, I've been offered this event, but I can't really take it because I'm in really bad shape. But if I don't take it, is this the last chance I get for the rest of the year? Do you know what I mean? And then like mentally, you're all over the place. It can be very destructive in that way. So it's not something I deal well with, to be completely honest with you. I'm constantly trying to figure out logically what the best decision is. It's a tough one, man.
It definitely is. And I mean, I think we've all had moments like this where, you know, your health might be a little bit poor, or you might be going through something personally, but you know that you don't want to pass up an opportunity because you want the opportunity. You know, you want the financial gain, you want the exposure gain, you want the opportunity to work in that environment, to improve yourself, to become better, because there's no better practice at our level now than just going to events and doing them. I mean, you can kind of, you know, do research, try to be more familiar with teams and players and like be more knowledgeable. You can listen back to VODs and pick out things and critique yourself, or get someone to critique you and watch the VOD with you. There's a lot of things you can do to improve and to get better, but the bulk of it is just going to be trial and error on the spot. You know, and then after a game, you can talk with your co-caster and be like, hey, like what went well, what went not well, or you know, maybe you get some feedback from your producer or a fellow talent member, or maybe you see some community feedback that you think's valid that you can mend. So yeah, a lot of it is that, and then you do have to deal with the whole health concern. Then there's some personal stuff, you know, like there's plenty of people in our scene that have dealt with some type of great loss in their family or something, yet they still must play on. It happened at the major to multiple different people, like Dupree and Flusha, for instance, like both lost a parent while they're at the major, but they're going to keep playing because they still have that drive. And it also kind of, I guess in some ways, escapism, right? It helps you kind of just focus on something else and kind of keep your mind away from, you know, the pit, like the dark areas of dealing with the loss like that. That's happened to, you know, plenty of us. You know, I know that's happened with you. You know, I lost my mother right before I went to a CEVO LAN, like literally, you know, 3 weeks before I went. And there was never a question that I was still going to go, because I knew it was pivotal that I did to continue my career. And I knew that my mother would have wanted me to go. And I knew that I wasn't going to gain anything by staying home. You know, so I think it is one of those things that's really difficult to try to balance. So definitely something to think about. I do want to ask, though, like related to this topic is, you know, although you're very, you know, transparent with the fact that there have been different health issues that have caused you to miss events and things of that nature, there's also seems to be this misconception that's why you don't get hired. I think that's been out there that I feel like, you know, I think you've addressed this maybe a little bit before, but I think maybe I was just going to kind of give you the opportunity to kind of talk on this, about this misconception that, oh, well, he probably can't get hired because he can't travel, right? So maybe you can clear the air on that a little bit.
Yeah, this is a misconception. I mean, I've probably had to turn down in the last 3 or 4 years, maybe 4 or 5 events due to bad health, and that's it. And they're normally events to like China or South Africa or somewhere I'm going to be traveling a great deal. And it wasn't like a tier 1 event, or the pay wasn't good enough or whatever else. So I had to really try and figure out, and it was a long and hard process of me trying to, you know, justify, could I go across there? Is the risk versus the reward worth it, in my opinion, on the balancing sort of act? But I think some people have the conception that I don't get offered any of those events, or that I get offered like loads and I'm just turning all of them down. That isn't true.
Right.
I mean, the fact of the matter is, there's a lot of very, very good, talented people in this scene. And as you touched on before, they're all jockeying for position. They're all jockeying for those limited amount of slots available. So a lot of times it comes down to budget, or it comes down to a duo partner, or it comes down to one of 100 different things. And I just won't get offered the gig. Or someone will reach out to me and they'll say, we'd probably like to hire you for this event. And I'm like, cool, okay, yeah, let's discuss this. Let's talk rates, all this sort of stuff. And I never hear back from them. Of course, that's the classic, and I'm sure you've been through that a bunch of times yourself.
Never been through that before. It's never happened.
Really? Yeah, reasonable.
Then they come back to you 2 days before and be like, yeah, remember that event we reached out to you about 2 months ago? Then we went radio silent, and you just assumed that you weren't going to get it, obviously. Oh, wait, can you come tomorrow?
And you're like, but I already have plans. Why are you doing this?
No, definitely, but never happened to me. Never happened.
Never. Didn't happen.
Nope.
Yeah.
No idea what you're talking about.
Yeah. Of course, every cast has been through that a ton of
Oh,
times. It's
100%.
incredibly frustrating. And you plan, not just in other events, by the way, but you plan real life shit around that. You know, if you have weddings coming up, or family get-togethers, or birthdays, or whatever else, and you've planned something, and then out of the blue, that the organizer suddenly does get back to you, or you assume you're going to go to that event. This is why now I have like a strict policy with myself, where I won't assume I've got an event till I've got my hotel and flights booked.
Until the flight tickets are booked, I ain't going anywhere.
Exactly.
Or the public announcement comes out, like, you know, with your picture on it or something. Because sometimes that comes first before the plane tickets arrive. So
when I'm streaming, a bunch of people are like, when's your next event? And I'm like, I can't really tell you, because I don't want to announce I'm working somewhere, and then it falls through last second, as it has 1,000 times before.
That and like TOs do generally not want you to say until they announce it themselves.
Of course,
so
they don't want you to steal the thunder. They don't want you to step on any toes, and I'm very cognizant of that as well. So I may like kind of flirt with an idea of I might have an event coming up, but I'm not going to say exactly what it is, because either it may fall through, or as you say, the organizers may be pissed off about that. But I mean, it's one of those things that I think people have a little bit twisted. I have had to turn down some events because of health. I'm not going to say I haven't, but it's nowhere near as much as some people make it out.
Yeah. So this kind of naturally just into the next topic I want to have a discussion about. This is where we're going to get like the real meat of this, even though we've been doing this for 45 minutes already. So it's a little late, I guess, for that. But this is where like I wanted like the heart of our discussion to really take place, is around some of these topics coming up next. And we've already kind of touched on it with what you just were talking about the idea of getting consistent work and being able to stay consistent, because that's probably the most important thing. That's kind of your heartbeat. Like, yes, you always want to progress and get a bigger event and get an opportunity at a tier 1 tournament, especially for someone like myself. Like, I've never really worked a tier 1 tournament. You know, I did E-League Season 1 very briefly, like a few days of the first week of the regular season, and I've done remote commentary for like DreamHack Masters, which is a tier 1 event, but I've never really had an opportunity at a tier 1 event. So what drives me is like I really want to like get an opportunity to tier 1 event on a desk as a commentator. Like I really want that chance. I think, you know, I've worked that hard, and I think that you were probably very much in the same boat until that opportunity finally came. And then the next thing you wanted to progress to was a major, right? Now the next thing you want to progress to is a major final. So see, there's always a natural desire to progress, but the I guess the backbone to it, like the foundation from which you must build that progression from, is at least the consistency of working events on a regular basis for financial stability, for exposure purposes. Like you said, if you're gone for too long, out of sight, out of mind. But then you have to balance that with viewer fatigue, so you don't want to like overdo it. So there's like this fine balance you have to meet on, you know, going out there long enough to get the exposure, get the financial stability, work on your craft, improve yourself, and have that, you know, like foundation, like I said, and then also try to make progress off the back of that. It's like two different goals you're chasing after at the same time, and they're both very much related to each other, because it takes the consistent work at a lower level to then get you noticed to get that event at a top level, right? So they're very much intertwined, and I think the biggest issue is that so very much of it is 100% out of your fucking control, because you can want to grind all day long. You can be 100% available to work every single day of the year, but the reality is you might not get selected. And I think people don't understand that, you know, this is not like literally any other job in the world. You know, there's no auditioning, there's no interview process, there's no application you fill out. You know, at least in acting, like in Hollywood, there's still auditioning processes. You know, there might be some politics behind how your audition is viewed, but at least you can say to yourself, hey, at least I did get a shot. Now, whether or not the shot I actually got was equal to someone else's shot, based on politics or what have you. Yeah, you don't know that, but at least you did audition for the part, right? At least you did go through some type of interview process or something. That doesn't really exist, at least for a lot of us, I don't think. Like, a lot of it is very much either you're already established, so you're essentially always going to be reached out to first, or you're someone who's kind of next in line, so you wait for things to trickle down, or maybe events are conflicting at the same time, so obviously there's a need that weekend for casters because there's you know, simultaneous events, and there's this really difficult thing that it hurts to not at least feel like you have some control over it. Like, you can try to reach out to people, you can put together a demo reel, you can do different things to try to increase your chances and like somewhat be proactive, but there's a hard limit to how proactive you can be compared to almost any other career that you might want to go after, or education you might want to go after, where there is some type of vetting process. Whereas commentary can be very much subjective, can be very much based on networking, it can be very much based on community popularity, which you also don't necessarily always have control over. So yeah, like, this is, I think, a topic that, you know, I've kind of set the basis for it already. I think I've already kind of addressed some of the biggest issues with it, but kind of what's your take on this whole concept of consistency and it not being in control, and how you deal with it and how you view that whole aspect of being a commentator?
I think you touched on probably the main one in my eyes, which has kind of changed over time. Networking is such a huge integral part of being a caster and being a successful caster, in my opinion. And I will readily admit I am terrible with this. I am awful at networking. I'm not naturally somebody that goes out of his way to be super sociable or start conversations or tries to network. And typically the people that are very good at that will last in the minds longer. Many of them are incredibly skilled, of course, casters, so it just
can we just address that really quick, because I think most people would hopefully just assume this, but I do want to put it out there before people keep listening, before they get all mad triggered. By no means, when we're having this discussion about being consistent and trying to shape opportunities, are we saying that we deserve it over someone else, or that, you know, it's us versus them, or any acts of animosity. The people, like the three big duos, the elite analysts, like the elite host, elite interviewers, like the people that you see regularly, they paid their dues to get there. They grinded their ass off to get there. They're very good at what they do. And it's not as if we're trying to say that we deserve to leapfrog them based on our own grind or our own ability. You know, so I just want people to kind of make sure they understand that it's not an us versus them game. I guess to some degree it is competition, though, because again, there are limited slots. You're wanting those slots, which means, in theory, that means that they must not be there for you to get that slot. But it's not like a direct, like, I'm thinking of this person, I have this person in mind, I must get him off the board so that I can be on the board. It's more of just kind of pursuing your own desires and knowing that, yeah, it does mean someone's got to be missing for me to be there, but, you know, there's no necessary animosity. Maybe there is amongst some people, right? I can't speak for everyone in the scene. I'm sure there has been little buttings of heads. I think Sadicus even said as much in an interview he did with Thorn recently on Reflection. So it does happen, but that's not what we're getting at here. So I just wanted to put that kind of caveat in. But yeah, go ahead and continue what you're saying.
No, absolutely not. I mean, I'm more talking about breaking into the very top tier as opposed to the top tier already there. And even then, I'm not saying that they have no talent or anything like that. Not at all. I'm just saying readily I admit that I am terrible when it comes to networking. And it's definitely something that has harmed my progression in the past. It's something that I'm trying really, really hard to work on, but it's going to take me a long time before I crack that, I think. But networking is a huge part of it. Obviously, as you said, I mean, there is an element of it out of your control, especially getting noticed in the first place. I think for budding casters that are trying to build a foundation that they can really establish some kind of exposure, it's very, very tough in CSGO because there are so many incredibly talented casters, even going down to tier 2, tier 3. So to even get in a position where you can get the first foot on the ladder, the rung of the ladder, very, very difficult to do. I think luck definitely comes into it. As you say, community, I don't think plays as big of a role as some people may anticipate, because at the end of the day, yes, the organizers want to make sure they don't make a really unpopular pick, but I don't think they have as much of a grasp on the community as some may think they do. I think a lot of it honestly boils down to, when you get the opportunities, are you good to work with?
Yep.
Do the other casters get on with you? It's not necessarily about being their best friends, but are you going to make the atmosphere or the vibe of the event so much worse by just being a part of it? And that, like, there's so many different intricate layers to getting consistent work. You could go on for a whole 2 or 3 hours about this, but ultimately I think we've hit the main points on the head. But of course, that is an integral part of your work, of your finances, your income. If you're not getting consistent work, if it's more spotty and sporadic like it was for me back in 2015, and then through certain other parts of years, 2018 as well, you do start to question, like, where's my next paycheck coming from? Am I getting hired again? All of these things start to creep in the back of your head. And I think this is why a lot of tier 1 casters start to get cold feet about the idea of pulling back and having breaks, because in their mind they're thinking, well, is this the gateway for that tier 2 guy to come in now and take my position and my jobs? Of course, probably not. But at the same time, this is what freelancing and this is what the esport kind of bug does to you. It gets in the back of your head and it induces paranoia.
Yeah,
it's a strange beast that you have to balance out.
Yeah, you definitely can be proactive and reach out to people, but then you have to balance that too, because you don't want to be annoying. You don't want to be constantly nudging them like, hey man, you got any work available? You know what I mean? Like, not in those exact words, but it's basically the message you're sending when you keep pestering someone with emails over and over again. So it's a fine line of, you know, reaching out, but also not, you know, being persistent and you know, confident. But there's also the point where you get a little bit annoying and maybe you're overdoing it. So it's very much you're waiting around for someone to reach out to you and hoping that they do, with no real guarantee that they ever will, right? And then the amount of notice you'll have about whatever they're reaching out to you for can vary from several months to a couple of days, right? You just have to kind of be ready. So you either need to have a savings account that you can burn through to stay afloat, or you need to have some other type of, you know, stable job, and you make this your side hustle until you actually get consistent enough to make it a career. So I think that's something I would tell, you know, casters out there, like, you know, definitely make this your primary focus and work as hard as you can at it, but you got to be realistic and you got to make sure you have a safety net. And I think that that's something I've struggled with, and something that other people have struggled with as well, is trying to deal with the whole feast and famine aspect of being a commentator at this level, because sometimes you are riding it hard and you're getting a lot of events together, but sometimes, like you've said, you know, at different points in your career, and for many of us, you might go a couple of months with nothing. And then all of a sudden you might have been making pretty good money during your run, but now it's all gone because now you've gone a couple of months with no income. So I definitely think that the whole idea of consistent work and that whole aspect is definitely a tough one to wrestle with. And I think maybe a lot of people probably already had kind of an idea that happened, but maybe don't really know the extent of it or how it feels. So that's kind of why I wanted to talk about this topic a little bit.
Yeah, especially at like a tier 2 or tier 3 level. I think for tier 1 casters, they're going to be okay by and large. They're going to have enough events going around the clock and making a decent amount of money. But for sort of like the lower tier casters, yeah, I think you hit a key phrase there. Feast or famine is definitely accurate. I've had times where I've had 3 or 4 events in a row, and then I've had 4 or 5 months where I've had nothing, no offers at all. Maybe a couple of online gigs here and there, but nothing substantial. So, I mean, in 2017, I actually had a part-time job for a little while. I picked up a bit of shop work just in the background because it was looking so bleak for the future. So this is something that many of us have had to deal with. I know you personally are thinking about dipping in and maybe picking up a side job or starting to study or other things to keep your options going forward in case casting kind of dips down a little bit more, analysis work isn't as readily available. And I think this is something that a lot of tier 3 and tier 2 casters have at least had to entertain the idea. They're like, okay, there's no paychecks coming in. I've got bills to pay. Like, what the hell do I do? Where do I go from here? There's no work on the horizon.
Yeah, and it's one of those situations where it's like really no one to blame. Obviously, right. It is obviously hurtful when, you know, an invoice comes in late. Like, you know, you've been waiting on a payment that it's late, and that can hurt. And there's also situations where people can give you such short notice on being hired that it can cause a lot of problems. So those are definitely things where you can put some blame. But then a lot of it is just like, well, you know, shit, like I understand that there's these people ahead of me on the totem pole, and so they're obviously going to get gigs. But, you know, how am I going to fit in is because things trickle down or people aren't available, or budgeting situations, like smaller events can't afford, you know, top people because they have other costs to worry about. So it's definitely a tough one to wrestle with, the consistency of work. Definitely, again, I think we've kind of really hit on that quite a bit. But again, it's one of those things where, you know, you have to, the way I want to end this topic is that the way that you get consistent, part of it is indeed luck, right? But I feel like luck is where, you know, opportunity meets hard work. It's where you've put in the work to put yourself in position that way, if the luck happens and the opportunity comes, and yeah, it might be a little bit lucky, but if you didn't work hard, you wouldn't have even been in a position to get considered anyway. And then no amount of luck would have saved you at that point because you didn't work yourself to a point that got you in that position. So that's kind of how I want to end that. But go on. What were you going to say?
Yeah, I was just going to say, plus, if you haven't worked hard and you haven't grinded and you haven't got a good grasp of your craft, whether it be analysis, hosting, casting, whatever, and you get the opportunity, you're not going to make the most of it anyway. So you have to make sure that when you do get a chance, you grab it with both hands and you do everything in your power to run with it. Do not let that drop. That's probably the biggest advice that I'd give newcasters, because I get asked this so many times. It's like, you get an opportunity, you do everything in your power to make the most of that, because you don't know when the next one will come around.
Let's get into more community interaction, right? Because obviously you are a public figure when you decide to take on a role like this, which means that coming with that is going to be support and love, and it's going to be hate, and the hate will be divided into legitimate criticism, and then it'll also be go kill yourself. So there's a very wide margin there on what hate looks like. And then I would say sometimes criticism is like neutral, not necessarily hate, but like, like, you know, you're cool, but I wish you would work on that. So I guess like the topic I want to get into with this is just kind of discussing how you deal with it and how you filter through it all, and, you know, how important is it really? Because I feel like you have different philosophies on this. Like, one philosophy that some talent has, which I feel like they're only halfway fucking committed to, is like, you should just ignore it all. Just don't even read Reddit or Twitter or anything. Just ignore it all. You know, be confident in yourself. Trust only in your peers to give you critique, and don't listen to any of it. I think sometimes it's kind of inescapable because you'll go on Reddit not looking for criticism of yourself, but you just wanted to go on Reddit to keep up with the news, wanted to see what's going on, like what roster move just happened, but then you come across a thread with your name in the title, and it's like, how the fuck do I not click that at that point? Like, I'm already here. Like, I didn't actively seek it, but it has appeared, and it's really hard to stop yourself at that point once you're already there from just taking the dive and plunge and reading through it. And I think me and you have very similar philosophies on how we deal with this, and maybe our thoughts on what the community should be doing. Like, obviously we can't tell people what to do. They're going to do what they're going to do, but at least kind of give you our take on like what we think is reasonable and what's not, and kind of how we judge through it and how much of an impact it has. So kind of curious, because I think there's a lot around this topic, by the way, but I'm kind of just figured I'd let you open up and start it off.
So my philosophy on community feedback and stuff is that I'm receptive to constructive criticism, and I've even changed my casting style in the past as a result of this, or changed how I pronounce people's names or things like that. They're actually helpful. Or if I've been repeating phrases or certain things, that's really helpful. But as I said, I've been through so much shit in my life that I don't really get affected by super negative stuff. If it like builds up and it's constant all the time and I'm having a rough day, maybe I'll think about it for like a couple of seconds, but most of the time it'll just bounce off me. I'm not really that bothered. I will say though that people that react very negatively to the criticism, it's one of the few downsides about having a job like this that's so incredibly good. It's the same thing with players. Like, if you're getting hated on because you've been performing bad, it's part of the territory. Like, you've just got to take that with the good and the bad together. Like, yes, it sucks. And of course, if people are like wishing you death and cancer and saying they're going to kill you and stuff, that's a whole different thing altogether. But if it's like actual criticism or, you know, hating or whatever you want to call it, I feel like we're a bit too sensitive with a lot of that stuff. And I try my best to just kind of like move past it. At the same time, I used to be very receptive when I first started out to trying too much, I think, to bend over backwards to accommodate the community, because I was in the mind frame of like, I'm really trying, like, you know, going back to the consistent work thing, trying to do everything in my power to get hired more. But as I've got more events and I've kind of matured as a commentator, I've realized that a lot of that, and no disrespect to the community, because some people really do know what they're talking about, but if you're getting lectured by someone from the community about how to cast better, chances are they've never actually commentated themselves or don't know like the finer details of what goes into that. And so they could be speaking from a place of ignorance. So sometimes you have to read the comment and just take it with a pinch of salt and not really get too affected by it. But there are some hidden gems in there as well. Like, I've had plenty of really good constructive feedback that I've read, and I'm like, shit, he's right. Like, I definitely agree with that. That's something I can work with. Yeah. So I have like, again, it's a balancing act. You've got to take the good with the bad. and weed out the ridiculous stuff like wishing death. I mean, I've had people say they hate my casting because I'm fat, and it's like, it shouldn't really have any bearing on my commentating.
Yeah,
you know what I mean? Like,
it's a classic.
If I'm overweight or not, like,
Yeah.
if you said you don't like my casting because my voice, okay, fair enough. I can't really do much about that, but I can at least understand where you're coming from. But comments like that, you just got to brush off and be like, cool, man.
It's one of those things where you're just trudging through piles of shit to find like one daisy, though. Sometimes it feels very overbearing when you want to find the nuggets, the positive things that can help you, but along the way you do have to trudge through a lot of abuse. And again, this is not us whining, us from like a privileged position whining about one of the few negatives we must deal with. But I mean, I just thought maybe people might want insight on how we deal with things and think about things. And so that's all this really is. It comes with the job. We knew it was going to happen. Obviously, got to deal with it. But yeah, sometimes, I feel like the best way I can describe it is that it's like death by 1,000 paper cuts. Like, you might be able to handle a few pieces of hate and kind of just like brush it off and ignore it. But once you get hit enough, it feels like a hailstorm. And I think it does begin to wear on you sometimes. I think we're all human, and no matter how much we'd like to ignore hate and kind of just, move by it and let it bounce off, eventually you're going to hit certain points where you are going to let it get to you, and it may be in ways like you may let it get to you for a couple of months, but then you kind of work your way out of it through like self-confidence or, just by, moving past it and trying to focus forward, and then you'll be good for a while, and then hate will bounce off of you for a while. Like you're just like a force field, but then it'll wear down again. It kind of comes and goes in waves, I think. So there's a mixture of that, but then like you said, there's a lot of positive that you can gain from community interaction. First off, it's great to be able to interact with people who are supporting you and kind of show your appreciation. So there's that element, and then there is the element of the critique that actually helps you, because I'll tell you this, man, it's actually really hard to get critique any other way, other than self-critique. Or if you're invested in a duo with someone else, then yeah, your duo partner might be willing to invest into giving you some critique. But man, I can't tell you how many times I've looked for critique after I've done an event by talking to my fellow talent in the green room, saying, hey, was there anything you noticed that I could work on or anything that I did well? Or you'll go talk to the line producer who's running the broadcast and ask him for feedback, or you'll ask for the guy who hired you for his feedback because he hired you, so you kind of assume that, hey, you probably pay attention to my work because he knows who I am and he's hired me. But then you'll go to them and you'll just hear, oh, I thought you did a really good job. Great. Like, perfect. Like in a way that's good that they have a positive opinion of you and they've told you that you've done a good job, which hopefully reinforces in their mind that you're a good person to hire going forward. But at the same time, it doesn't really do you any good, because now clearly there has to be something to work on. Like, you're never going to be perfect, but sometimes it can be very difficult to get that feedback from other outlets. Like, not always. I've definitely had some people help me out along the way throughout the years, give me feedback, sure, but sometimes it can be hard to find, because people, even if they're the most good-natured people in the world and they do really want to help you, maybe they just don't have the time. They have their own shit going on. Right. So it does sometimes come down to community interaction to get nuggets. And I've gotten plenty of them. Talking speed was a big one I got hit for. Deliveries have been thing I've been hit for before. My voice was one that's been hit before, but there's only so much you can do about that. Like, you can obviously work on projection and using your diaphragm and, different things like that. And you can kind of try to numb your accent a little bit or make it, more agreeable to the person's ear. But there are going to be still some limits to voice. So you have to take that with a pinch of salt. Like you've kind of noted, there are some things that you just can't change. And then it's that fine balance of like, well, yeah, if my talking speed is too bad, if I'm talking too fast, or if my delivery isn't smooth enough, or I'm not interacting with my, co-caster or co-analyst well enough and having better discussion, those are all things you can work on. Then there's certain critiques where people just be like, well, I don't like his style, or I don't like this or that. And then you have to be really careful with those, because even if there's an element of truth to it, if you first of all, you'll never please everyone, right? So you'll never be able to make adjustments that will suit everyone's needs, because maybe you'll tweak something you do and it makes someone like you more, but it makes someone else like you less, right? Or you get into a part where you change so many things that you lose yourself. Like, you lose your own identity, you lose your own brand, or you lose what you liked about yourself, and you're not even you anymore. So I think that's like a really crazy interaction that kind of takes place. I feel like a community interaction. Do you feel any of this whenever you're going through, post about you or tweets or what have you?
Well, I think I've been really fortunate. For whatever reason, the community has typically been overwhelmingly positive with the construction sorry, the constructive feedback and like just the general feedback overall. I've been very, very lucky. I don't know why, but that's just one of those things. So I haven't had to deal with it anywhere near as much as some other people have. But yeah, I mean, I think my thought process on the whole situation is to check this stuff in moderation, not get carried away in one direction or the other. It's easy, you know, if you have a really solid appreciation thread and everyone's loving you, to be like, oh, I am fucking brilliant. But it's really important to ground yourself. You know, that's the way I was raised, is to never get carried away with stuff in a good or a bad way.
Right.
Trying to keep balance, try and keep calm. And so I think that's something that a lot of people could learn and become better with. But as he also said, like, we're all human. Catch us on a bad day. If you see a particularly bad comment, it's going to impact you in some way. But that's why I try my best not to read a lot of these places anymore. I just kind of keep to myself. Obviously, if you get tweeted at directly with someone that's like, go kill yourself, you're terrible, it's like kind of hard to avoid that.
That's just in your notification feed that you're scrolling through, so you're going to see it. Like, there's no avoiding that one, right?
You just mute it and move on.
Yeah,
you know,
exactly.
Whatever. Like, I actually kind of pity people like that, because if anything, it shows me that they're struggling in their life. And there's been many times on my stream as well where I'll actually go out of my way to interact with these people and try and actually speak to them like a person. Because a lot of them they're kind of like lashing out because of some issue in their own life, and I want to help wherever I can. But yeah, it's important to just kind of like take the good with the bad. We do something incredibly blessed. We're incredibly lucky to get paid to do this job. If you get a few nasty comments now and again, yeah, so be it. It's better than working a 9 till 5 job or on a construction site somewhere.
Sure. I think one of the things I'll just say to kind of end this aspect of it is that I just hope that people in the community can kind of understand that sometimes things are happening and you don't realize why. So, like, for instance, I know that there's been times when people will complain like, oh, this one caster's talking so much, and the other one barely gets to talk at all. There could be an actual problem there in the commentary. Like, the commentators might actually be doing a bad job. So you might be right. But what you might not realize is that someone's mic doesn't fucking work. And so because of that, other person has to talk more. Or producers in the other guy's ear, he's like, you know, letting you know, hey, producers in my ear, like, you know, keep going, or coughing fit, or I need to take a drink of water, or there's many different things that could happen. So this is just one example, by the way. There's just many other things. But sometimes when you're critiquing a commentator or you're noticing something, maybe make sure you notice it consistently before you rush to complain about it, because it might just be a heat of the moment thing that's only going to happen very briefly and then it'll pass. Or, you know, like, and then look out for improvement as well. Like, don't just set your mindset and then, you know, forget about that person and never reconsider them or give them another chance, so to speak, right? So just wanted to point that out. Go on.
I actually have an example about that, what you just hit. Like, you really hit the nail on the head. So I was casting in Marseille with Henry, and it was a bit rough to start off with because, again, I haven't really casted with him a great deal in the past, like Leipzig and Marseille and Stockholm pretty much. Towards one of the ends of the round, I was really sick. I'd ate something that didn't agree with me. I don't know what the hell it was. It came out of nowhere. It's like one of those phantom sick feeling where it just, like, I need to be sick right now. So during the round, I motioned to Henry, like, I'll be back in 2 minutes. And I went to the bathroom and I threw up, and then I came back and casted. So he was casting for literally, I think, a round and a half while I was away, like being sick. And he got so much shit for that round. What they don't realize is he filled in for me. Like, I physically had to go and throw up in the bathroom.
And what's he supposed to do? Be like, folks, the reason why you keep hearing me talking is because Vince had to go barf. Like, look,
exactly. Yeah.
You can't do that.
So unprofessional. No one wants to hear that when they're live casting. And I just fill back in. And until I've said that, you probably had no idea it ever happened, right? But yet Henry's going to get the flack and the shit for that round, even though I literally needed to leave the casting booth, which I've only ever done one time, and that was it. To go and throw up and then come back again and cast like nothing happened.
Then there's always the classic, the casters just want to keep talking and won't let the game start, or the classic, the analyst desk, we're filling for a tech issue that you are not aware of. Like, there's the classic things too, where like, just shut up and start the game already. Like, mate, like, I'd love to do that, but, you know, like, I'm being asked to fill for another 5 minutes, so that's what you're going to get.
Which we don't want to do, by the way, because we're cutting into information and research and stuff that we wanted to use through the game. Like, those are talking points that we now can't use through the game because we've had to use them in a fill that we didn't expect to do. Like, when we go live, especially if you're commentators, unless they've said beforehand, right, we're going to have a segment where you guys kind of discuss things for a couple of minutes before you get into the game. What normally happens is it goes to the casters in the knife round or as the first round's about to begin. So if it jumps to us and we're of the mindset of, okay, we're about to go live, it throws to us and they're like, tech problem, sorry, fill for 10 minutes. We're like, fucking hell. We don't want to sit there and fill for 10 minutes. Nothing could be further from the truth.
Then you'll start talking about something like, we're back to game now. And you're just like, well, so much for that discussion we were about to have that we've already started and we've got 20% through. So yeah, I guess the whole point where I was just getting that there is like, if you're out there in the community and you're witnessing something on stream that seems off, maybe give it a minute before you immediately rush to Reddit to go post a thread about how bad someone is, because it might be that something's happening that you're not aware of and it might blow over pretty fast and you'll notice that adjustment take place and that person improve. And they give people second chances or third chances. Like, people are constantly evolving as commentators or analysts, and while they may not have been your cup of tea when you first heard them, understand that people do change over time. They work on things, they get better, and then maybe you will like them going forward. Like, maybe they will have made an adjustment that actually makes you appreciate them or something like that. So don't be so set in your ways. Again, I don't know why I'm bothering telling people what to do, because like, obviously you're going to live your life, but I at least wanted to kind of give some insight on kind of our end of it, because you know your end of it, you're the Redditor out there making the comments, but you know, maybe you're curious about what goes through our head or what we do. And definitely that community interaction is definitely a very mixed bag, where, you know, again, you can pull some positives from it, like some good self-critique that will actually make you better, but you might also trudge through a bunch of abuse on the way to doing so. Some of the abuse might be valid, maybe you've done something wrong and you deserve some abuse, or some of the abuse might be completely invalid, and you know, we just have to kind of deal with it, and it's just what it is. It's part of the job. So there's a lot of different things that go on community reaction, and tied to it, I think, is confidence. Like, I feel like confidence is really important, because without confidence, you might be too scared to do your job, almost like you kind of hold yourself back from making certain comments or saying certain things or trying certain things, because you're a little bit worried about how it'll go. So you're constantly second guessing yourself, and so it makes it to where it's not as smooth. Like, it's either forced or you're too reserved or something like that. So confidence can be very important for that. And it also can be very important in just how you sound. You know, if you're confident in what you're doing, you're going to have more fun with it. It's going to feel more natural. It's going to be better. But if you're not confident, then you might be a little bit more robotic. You might, you know, be a little bit more kind of reliant upon certain phrases or certain things that you do, instead of, you know, trying to be more flexible and kind of be more original and add new ideas and things of that nature. So there's a lot of that goes on, and it's tied to community interaction, because obviously abuse can whittle your confidence. Or you might get in your own head and second guess yourself, and that can bring down your confidence. Another aspect of confidence is this constant idea where you want to be confident so that you can do your job well, but you also don't want to get overly cocky to where you're being an asshole to people, you're being a diva, or, you know, you're actually toning down your quality because you kind of lost your grind, you've lost your hustle, you've lost your work ethic, and you're kind of just being content and kind of just coasting through. If you get too overconfident, that could happen. And then you start getting into this mind game where you're trying to rank your head of self of other people. I'm better than this person, or this person isn't good, I'm way better than them. And you start getting into that thing. So I'm kind of curious, like, what's your take on some of these topics I've mentioned?
Yeah, I mean, confidence is a weird one, because I feel like confidence obviously comes in many different shapes and sizes. I mean, I'm confident I could look after myself if someone tried to attack me. I'm confident I could pick up heavy as shit weights. Am I confident in front of the camera? Hell no. You know, it's different elements. And I completely see what you mean. Like, when it comes to confidence, if you're not feeling yourself, or if you're doubting what you're saying, people can sense that from a mile away. It's like blood in the water for a shark. They can tell it from a mile off with a commentator if they're not 100%. So yeah, confidence is a big issue that I've had to contend with over the years. I'm still somebody that is constantly like looking inward and trying to be very self-critical and like try my absolute best to improve. But as you say, you don't want to go overboard to the degree where you're impacting your own work because you're kind of psyching yourself out of doing it properly. I will say, when people throw shit my way, I actually just use it as fuel. Like, it's very rare that someone's going to say something like, you're a garbage caster, and I'm going to sit back and go, oh, you know, maybe they're right. Maybe I should get... No, I'm like, okay, cool. I'll prove you wrong. It happened a lot of the major. A lot of people were disappointed as Anders wasn't there and Pansy wasn't there, and they're like, Vince is going to suck. I wish he wasn't there. I wish Scrawny and Lornas were there instead. I'm like, cool. I'll prove you wrong then. I'll go in there and I'll do everything I can to, if not change your mind, at least respect me a little bit more. So I think it hits people in different ways. And so in terms of like ranking yourself compared to others, that's a very slippery slope, and it's a very hard one. I know I've said this to you before, and I think I said this to Richard as well, that there is no leaderboard with commentating. There is no like first spot is, second spot is, because it's very subjective. it's very, very opinion based. Some people may think that you and I as a duo would be fantastic, and some people may think would be absolute hot garbage. You know, and it's hard to distinguish where you rank in with the other duos. And as an individual caster or an analyst, I can say that in terms of like pure hype casting, I think that I'm on an even playing field with anybody out there in the big moments, like the big clutches and stuff. I think I can hold my own against anybody. But when it comes to like camera work and personality and brand, I'm garbage. Like I think that's kind of like my strengths and weaknesses in a nutshell. So I don't view it as if, well, Anders is a 9.5 in this and I'm a 9, and you know, Patakist is a 10. I just kind of view it as, do I feel like my own self-improvement is staying at a gradual increase? Do I feel like I've plateaued? Do I feel like I've let things slip? Am I getting into bad habits? Am I not giving it 100%? That's the kind of stuff that I'm focusing on a little bit more, because if you do get into like a ranking system, man, I think that's actually a pretty dangerous way of looking at things. Because if you feel like you're not on par with a caster, you're going to focus on that so much, and that's where confidence starts to slip, and that's where everything starts to cycle downwards.
Yeah, it's definitely one of those things where I feel like you have to at least believe that you're good enough to be amongst that group of people. Like for me, when I'm in desk analyst mode, although I may not be objectively as good as these other analysts that you see going on at big events, you have to at least believe, even if you like objectively know that they're better than you or the community likes them more than you have to at least have that confidence that either A, I'm already at the same level of those people, or B, I'm capable of getting to that level with enough time, practice, preparation, and drive that I can get there. Because otherwise, you're kind of devaluing yourself, and why are you even doing this anymore anyway? Like, if you don't think you deserve to be amongst those people, then A, you're probably just going to be in a self-fulfilling prophecy where you never do get there, and you're really holding yourself back, or, you know, maybe it's time to kind of move on because you just don't have that drive anymore, or you don't have that confidence anymore, and you either need to work to get it back or you need to get out of the way kind of thing. So it's definitely, like you said, a really tricky thing where it can be a slippery slope where you can kind of start putting yourself in some type of contest, and so therefore you can be selling yourself short, or you can be too confident, and then all of a sudden you're getting a little bit too cocky, a little bit too diva-ish, and you're going to all of a sudden kind of maybe, like I said, just kind of rein it in, kind of just be content, plateau yourself, rather than, you know, a plateau that we talked about earlier where you might plateau just because you're not getting offers and nothing you can do about it. You might plateau yourself if you get too cocky, and you stop yourself from getting better because you think you're already too good or something like that, right? So like it's a really tricky area to navigate. And I think that for me, I was almost kind of like the opposite, where like my confidence was like dog shit in comparison to maybe someone like yourself who's really confident in their work. Like it's only been very recently, with like in the last year or so, that I finally felt like I'm confident in what I do. And while I know I can be better, and while I know I have my shortcomings, I know that I can do a good job and that I can bring value to a desk or to a cast as a color commentator. And I feel like I've only just gotten there. I think I was there after Ely because that was such a big high, right? Like to get a gig that big so early on and me trying to become an analyst, that, man, like this was great. But then, you know, the Smith incident happens. Everyone's hating on you. Your confidence, you know, gets blown to smithereens. And it took a long time to get that back. And so I think probably other people out there in the space have gone through a similar journey where they'll have some confidence because things are going well. Things start going to shit. You know, counter jerk comes in. It's like the famous expression that we use, like the old Reddit counter jerk jumps through, and then all of a sudden your confidence gets torn down. And so you kind of have to find a way to at least have some type of foundation so you're not constantly picking up the pieces every time you take a hit, you know, from someone out in the community.
Well, the thing is that, yes, I've got a lot more confidence since the major, but until then I was still very little confidence, and even now, like I still have issues with it. I second guess myself, and I'll cast and I'll think, oh, that went so bad, you know. But then people be like, loved your casting, and again, it's that weird thing where you don't want to take too much community interaction to heart, because it's kind of hard to gauge where you are compared to what the community thinks of you. But I think Katowice was really where my confidence built a great deal, because you have to also remember, not only was I casting with Moses, who I've only casted with, like, was my third time, I hadn't done an event since Face It Major, and that was one best of 3. I hadn't casted in that time. Like, I'd done some open IP stuff, hadn't been at an event. So I went there thinking, this is a huge task. Like, this is a mountain ahead of me. And because I got through it and I felt like I did relatively okay, it built my confidence. I thought, okay, I belong here now. So yeah, I mean, it is one of those things though. But if you fast forward to like, I don't know, summer or whatever, if I've had a couple of events that haven't gone so well, confidence drops. That's the nature of it. You have to keep on top of it. You have to. It's a consistent building process. I don't think you've ever cracked it as a commentator. You never completed it, as it were. You always have to keep building. You always have to keep striving for more, and to make sure that your overall level doesn't drop. Because if it does, you better believe people are going to notice and they're going to let you know about it real quick. So you've got to keep on top of that. I don't think I'm ever going to rest, even if it were to cast like a major final somewhere down the line. I think it's a pipe dream. I doubt it'll happen, but I'll do everything I can to make it happen. Even if that happened, I still fully believe that I would still put everything into commentating because it's something that I just love that much.
Right. Do you ever, like, going back to that though, and I guess going to consistent work, do you ever feel like you're limited on that drive because maybe the opportunity is just not going to be there?
It's an interesting question, isn't it? Because on the one hand, you want to strive for the best, but on the other, you've got to be realistic. Mm-hmm. You don't want to live in a fairyland, like in a dream state. So, yeah, it's something that I've working towards now as hard as I can. As I said, I really want to be a part of Berlin, but I'm not sure if I'll be invited. I'm not even sure if I'll get invited to the minor sort of stages either. It's a huge question mark, but it can have a bit of a negative impact. But again, I choose at this point in my life. I feel like mentally I've kind of turned things around. I was looking at the negative side for so long, and now I'm trying to see the positive side and everything as best as I can. Obviously, sometimes you still slip, just human at the end of the day. But I'm looking at it as again, just like motivation to like prove myself wrong to a degree.
I definitely feel you on that one. I think that, yeah, for me, it's one of those things where, I obviously want to like work as hard as I can because, again, it's all about, hard work meets opportunity is what luck is. And so if you haven't done the hard work part to put yourself in position, then no matter if the opportunity comes there or not, you won't be ready for it, you won't be considered for it, or you won't be able to seize the opportunity, as you kind of mentioned a little bit earlier. So I think that's really a big part of it. But yeah, it does sometimes feel like an uphill battle. Like in my case, like on the analyst end, I know I'm always going to be an uphill battle because I'm not a former professional. And that automatically kind of hits your credibility with the community in comparison to someone who is a former professional. Even if you might theoretically be more knowledgeable than them because you study more, so like maybe a team's results and stuff more than they do because they haven't done the research. I'm not saying that's happened before. I'm just making like a theoretical thing. I wouldn't know because I don't know what people are doing, right? I don't know. I can't read people's minds and know what prep work they've done and what knowledge they have. Like you never really know. So it's one of those things where it can be tough because you might always be in an uphill battle, no matter what you do, but you still have to have that drive. And if you lose that drive, you're in for real trouble. Because it's a self-fulfilling prophecy at that point. Now you have no chance because you've already put yourself in a position to not. So yeah, I think it's definitely like a really interesting kind of back and forth to have with yourself. And, that you're obviously going to discuss with other people too. Like I know me and you have had this talk before about where we stand and what can we do to get off the plateau and make that next step and how much of it's under your control, how much of it's not. It's all a really interesting mental gymnastics type situation that you kind of have to go through in those situations. That's for sure.
It's actually one of the things that irritates me the most. So maybe I should have mentioned this earlier when you asked me about misconceptions that the community have, is when they assume that because you haven't played at a professional level, you have no right to judge plays, especially bad plays, like call someone out for a bad play. It's like, look, I haven't physically played in a finals or a major or professional level of Counter-Strike. I'll 100% concede to that point. But I have watched so much CS, I've watched so many demos, I've casted so much of this game at the top level that I still can have a good understanding of what the game is to a point that you can make generalizations, you can make calls on, that was a terrible smoke, that cost them the round. You don't have to be an ex-pro to see these things. On the other side of the coin as well, though, just because you are an ex-professional doesn't mean that you can convey all that vast knowledge that you have in your head vocally to the listeners in a coherent way that they can understand. That in itself is a skill. That is an art form. And some ex-professionals do not possess this. Some do. People like Sean Gares, Sponge, prime examples of it. They're fantastic at this. Pimp, I think he's another guy that's very good at doing this. But not every professional is going to be a good analyst. Not every professional is going to be a good color commentator. Just like every player that hasn't gone to a professional level can still read the game to a decent level. So I was going to ask you a question actually there, Dust. Is this something that you feasibly think that you can ever get over? That misconception from the audience, thinking that because you're not a pro player, you could ever make, like, let's say, let's really go big on this. I know you just want to get to a tier 1 event first, But let's say, do you think you could ever get to a major as a pure analyst? Can you get over this hump?
I think that there's always a chance that someone might eventually take a shot on me on a tier 1 event if someone else is unavailable, or they just want to try something new. I think that that's possible. But as far as like me being on an analyst desk at a major, unless they expand the amount of analysts present at the major, like if they just hired more analysts, then yeah, maybe. But if you're only hiring like 3 to 4 analysts for your major, I just don't really see how I would. Like right now, you have like Sponge, Pimp, Sean Gares. I think those is like a really strong 3. If Yanko ever comes back to it, I think he'd be immediately right back at the top. You have someone like Thorin who has his own brand of analysis that's always going to be up there. And he does a fantastic job. And there's several other like former pros. And then there's always the, well, what pros next? Because it's only a matter of time before someone else retires and gets a shot at it. And then all of a sudden you just move down another peg instead of going up a peg.
Follow-up question there then, Dust. Sorry to cut you off. Follow-up question. In that case, is that why you want to focus more on casting? Because you feel like there's more opportunities casting than being a raw analyst? Is that where you think the road lays ahead?
I think the road lays ahead for someone like me to just kind of be open-minded towards really any opportunity. Like being flexible, I think, is very important. But then maybe you become a jack of all trades and a master of none, so you kind of de-rank yourself on all fronts because you spread yourself too thin. But I think that being an analyst and being a color commentator is super similar. I think that you have to have a very similar knowledge base to do either role. It's just that you happen to focus on certain areas more than other areas depending on what role you're on. So if I'm on the desk, I'm focusing more on recent results, map pool, head-to-head history, recent player form, things of that nature, and then and very little strategy probably, and like unless it's a post game segment, I'm going through a replay like a weatherman segment or some shit, but not as much strategy and tactics, probably not as much like actual meta game philosophy on a map or something like that. But then in the color commentary side, you're going to be focusing more on the strategy and tactical side of the game. You're going to be trying to highlight what teams like to do, what to look out for. If you notice a team's made a role swap or an adjustment on what position someone's playing, you can kind of bring that up and try to highlight how that could be critical to the game. So you focus a lot more on that side of it. But if there's a timeout or there's a delay or there's something else going on or there's a slow part of a game like a save round, then maybe you are going to hit on some of those topics that you would hit on a desk. I think my point would be at the end of all that, it's just that analysts and color casters are actually really closely tied together. It's not nearly as different as like play-by-play commentary versus being a stage host. Like that's a very big difference in skill set and what you're going to be doing. Whereas I feel like you do very similar things between analysis and color commentary. If anything, you just get a lot more room to do your job in a broadcast compared to the desk where you might be limited on time. So for me, I don't think I think of it the way that you mentioned it, where it's like I want to shift to casting because I know that I can only go so far on the desk. Maybe that's true to some extent, but I think it's like I'll never close the door on desk opportunities. You know, like I'll always leave that door open and I'll always be ready for those opportunities because it's you know, you got to be willing and ready to take on things like that. And I love both. Like, you know, I think maybe I prefer casting a bit because I prefer strategy and tactics. Like that's my favorite thing to study when I do my research was watching demos and watching how teams play. Like what style do they have? Like who's doing what? Like what tactics do they have? What set pieces do they have? What nades are they innovating? Like that thrills me more than looking at numbers. So I think there's more room for that in the cast. So maybe I do favor that a little bit more for that reason. But to go back to what I was saying before you asked that question, it's not that it could never happen and I'm always going to try to chase after it. But I think being realistic, like I know that I'm always going to be at a slight disadvantage, right? I think that, like as you were talking about earlier, you know, people have to understand that if pros don't do the research, there will be things that they don't know. Like there are some things I'll never know that a pro knows because they've experienced it firsthand time and time again, what it feels like to be a player, what's the decision-making process a player is going through in this moment. Like that's where I think that former pros thrive. And they also thrive in post-game segments, by the way. They can break down what's gone wrong in a game or what's gone right in a game so very well because they've been in all those situations they're breaking down, so they know exactly what's going on. Like they have that really keen sense. But if that person that I'm talking about, like former player X who's on the desk, doesn't research a team's recent results or their map pick ban history, no matter how smart of a player you are, you can't know those things unless you just look that shit up, right? Like you don't just naturally know those things. Like those things change over time and you have to keep up with it. So that's an area where I can thrive if I'm well prepared and I can be on equal terms with other analysts because we're all pulling from the same information. It's just how we interpret it and display it is the difference. So that's kind of where I answer your question. So I want to fire back something at you. What's your philosophy on like casting style? Because you're a play-by-play commentator, obviously. So what do you think is most important about play-by-play commentary, and what do you think your take on play-by-play is? Like, what do you think your style is?
Oh, that's a deep question.
Yeah, this is a kind of out of left field a little bit, but
I think that the most important part of play-by-play casting, I mean, there's so many elements that are super important, and if you only master one of these and the rest of them are really lackluster, you're not going to be a good commentator. But I think like tonal shift and pacing are definitely up there. If you listen to a commentator that is all over the place with their pitch and they're getting hype at the wrong moments, or they're really monotone in the hype moments, it can kind of kill a cast stone dead as far as I'm concerned. So I think pace and tonal shift and being able to control the right moments to really let go and allow the hype to really come into fruition, and not just giving that away freely. Because every time that you hype a play that doesn't deserve it, you lessen the impact of a truly hype moment. You know, you can't, once you've gone to the top, there is no extra ceiling. Like you've gone to the climax, and there's no further part to play after that. So I think for me, those are the most important things alongside building a story. And when it comes to storyline, this is something that I've struggled with a bit in the past. I'm getting better at it. Not every game can have a storyline. Some games, there's not much to really go off, especially if you're casting like a group stage match and it's a relatively unknown team against a team they've never played before. You just have to go in there and be like, okay, look, the storyline kind of there isn't one. That there's a lot of uncertainty on this. There's a lot of question marks behind this game. Who am I as a caster? Jeez. I'm going to need a little bit of time to think about
that's
that.
fine.
So
we went from like very specific things that we're discussing to like fucking like what is the meaning of life? It's basically the jump
you kind of dropped the big one on me. So what's your philosophy on casting style then? Because obviously you've done analyst, you've done color casting. I know you've even done play-by-play back in the day. Where do you think you come in with philosophy? Like, okay, let me be actually a bit more specific.
Yeah, okay.
In color casting, what do you think are the most important roles like that you want to excel at?
I think that like with color commentary, again, I think the focus is very much on breaking down like what's happening in game and like what's most important, what's had the most impact, and kind of skipping over things that are not as important or they don't really need to be highlighted. Like obviously as a color commentator, you're keeping up with the economy, you're keeping up with how things have played out so far, you're keeping up with like what adjustments teams are making. Maybe if you know certain players having a rough game, and he's in a key position, that's going to be a real big problem. What adjustments they've been making throughout the game, what tactics they like to use that we haven't seen yet. So like if we've been watching them play like 5 or 6 rounds and they've just been running default every round and it's not working and they take a tactical timeout, you can kind of bring in like, okay, these are the set pieces I know they like to run. I've noticed that the defense is doing this throughout the game. They've probably noticed this too by how many numbers they've seen each time they've gone to this area of the map. So this might be a play they can consider doing. And I've actually gotten that right sometimes, and it feels so good when you do. It feels so great when like you call a play and it happens, and you're just like, damn, yeah, I nailed it. But then you might be wrong sometimes. So you're like, well, fuck, I missed out on that one. So I think a lot of it is you're helping the play-by-play tell the story, but you're doing it in a different way. Like you're highlighting the plays that are most important, the tactics that are most important, the adjustments that are most important. Then at the end of a round, you're recapping, what was the key kill of that round? What was the key moment that caused the round to go the way that it did? And then what must happen for that to change for that team going forward, or how must this team maintain what they've just done? So I think it's a lot of that. And I think it's also about setting up your play-by-play commentator. I think that's very important. Your play-by-play might be, talking a little bit at the beginning of the round, kind of talking about like basic positioning or kind of commenting on what you just said in the post-round part. And then it comes to you in like maybe a slow moment in the mid-round, and you're watching how people are setting up, what type of duels are people taking, what type of map control is the team going for, and you're trying to cover through all those things. Maybe you're pointing out, oh, I've noticed that this player usually plays here, but he's here now. If he's here, that usually means that this is going to happen. So you're kind of setting up the possibilities. You're trying to I think you're trying to prepare the viewer on what they might see, or you're trying to explain to the viewer what they just saw. I think that's like really the best way to sum it up. And then by preparing with people what they're about to see, you're also preparing the play-by-play to tell that story. If I notice people are setting up a certain way, I need to be able to understand, based on how this is playing out, the climax is about to start in the next 5 seconds. And I need to make sure that I've gotten it to my play-by-play in time to where I'm not doing color over a moment that really deserves play-by-play, because there's like a lot of trade fragging going on, or someone's in a clutch situation or something like that where color's not really needed right now. I need to let the play-by-play have a moment to tell his story. That's the other thing. Like, if you're too late to pass, then the play-by-play has no time to build, right? They just have to immediately jump into the action and play-by-play their fuck out of it and try to be super hype, but they had no build-up moment. Like, they didn't get to build up their voice. They didn't get to, like, really build the narrative behind the moment. So you need to make sure you give your play-by-play enough room to do exactly that, like to let them get their chance to build a narrative. You're basically adding context to the narrative that the play-by-play is trying to tell. Like, you're adding those little extra details, like those little extra descriptive phrases that make it more tantalizing to the viewer, if that makes sense. So I think that's kind of the way I would think about it. And that's what I try to do. I try to be like the brainiac, the guy who's done his research and can point out things that are very important or point out things to look out for. I think that's what I try to focus on the most. And that's the same way on the desk. Like, I think my philosophy on the desk is that I'm not the edgelord. I'm not the jokester. I'm often the butt of the joke, and I accept that role willingly because someone has to be that person. Like, someone's got to take the shots that someone else is dishing out that's entertaining and funny. And then you just got to take it on the chin, laugh about it, maybe fire one back, like, and kind of have some banter. But sometimes it needs to end, and we need to eventually start talking about some shit. And so you need to sometimes be the guy who takes the hit, like the punching bag, like I was for the whole fucking No Majors Club. Like, people who watch the No Majors Club, and all the different chat spam I got, and all the different things, like, to make the broadcast funny, I have to be willing to do that. And I think that I do that. I think I'm a great punching bag, basically. Like, so I think that that's one element of my philosophy on it. And I think that, yeah, I just try to be the one that's, I try to focus on certain things. Like, for example, if I'm on a desk with Thorin, I know that Thorin is a map pick ban guy. He's going to own that fucking segment. He's going to bring you some of the history and why this team should ban this map or pick this map. He's really, really good at that. He's also really good at history, like explaining the context of this matchup over time, or like what this player has done over the years. Like, he's obviously the historian, the esports historian, right? So if I'm on a desk with Thorin, then I know that, okay, he's going to focus on those things. So maybe I'm going to focus on most recent results and most recent form. Or maybe I'm going to focus on some of the tactical elements of certain players or something like that. So I think that I am very much a guy who likes to lean on strategy and tactics more than anything else. But I also can play ball in any other aspect of analysis. And I think it's just, I try to be the fact guy, but not just the fact guy, because I can get boring. You got to add some personality to it. But I try to be very much just trying to add as much insight as possible about what I've researched. Has this allowed you to come up with your philosophy on who you are?
Okay, so I think it's hard to answer this without coming across as like arrogant or an asshole, because I hate talking about myself in like a positive way. I don't know, it makes me very uncomfortable. But I think as a caster, I'm somebody that naturally tries to shine a light on other people to make them look better. I try to find the thing that other people are good at and try to assimilate my style to match theirs as best as I can. I think this is why I've had a lot of success, like going around casting with lots of different people, and why I'm picked to cast with like Moses or Henry or whoever needs me to kind of be at the event. I don't try and take over the broadcast and like say, look at me, look how great I am. It's more about look how good the broadcast is. So I think I'm kind of just like I just kind of like I'm like a float along caster that just tries to be rock solid, really.
Yeah,
that's probably
I think another element is like you shine a lot of people. You want to shine a light on the players and like the epic moments that they're pulling off. You want to highlight that. Like, you don't want to steal the show. Like, you don't want to steal the thunder of a player making a play. You want to emphasize that thunder and like do it justice. I think it's kind of what you're also getting at.
And I think that this is where I differ to the vast majority of the casters out there. I would happily be in a situation where esports casting was like football commentating. I realize, like, for you, soccer, obviously, you don't really watch a lot of it.
I know you're talking about.
They're not on camera
right.
at all. Like, they may have a picture pops up, or maybe it'll go to them at the top of the stand for like 5 seconds, and then it's all just voice in the background. They don't really play a huge part. They're not really huge personality. If it was up to me, that's the way that casting would be. I know that a lot of other casters are 180-degree turn on that. They really do not want that to be the case. They really want to build a brand up and a personality. So for me, yes, shining a light on the plays, showing respect to the players that deserve to have that respect shown them, and the organization and the situation at hand. I want to do my best to come away from that cast thinking I made this a more positive experience, or I brought something, whether it be hype, whether it be storylines, whether it be just hitting that play on the head and not overselling it, but just, you know, explaining why in the context of the grander scheme of things, it was a really important round. For me, that's kind of where I come down as a caster. I'm never going to be the most exuberant or center of attention kind of person. It's not who I am on a natural basis. So I think as a caster, I'm just somebody that gets their head down, does a good job. Hopefully other people around me enjoy me being around. Like, I'm not super talkative or anything, but I'm not going to be the kind of person that detracts from a situation. I'm not going to be like a diva or an asshole or anything like that.
Right.
So I think that's kind of like the legacy or whatever that I'd like to leave behind once I do finally, you know, take a step back from casting, that people like, he was fun to work with and he did a really solid job.
I think the other thing I'll just say, like, because like from the outside watching you cast, kind of some of the things I pick up on that you do well is like, obviously you're very good at breaking hype, but you're very good at not overhyping stuff or underhyping things. Like, you're really good at, like, if people give you enough time, you build it up quite nicely. Like, you start from like a basement level or just above a basement level, and you're able to bring it to the attic in a really smooth way that doesn't seem undersold or oversold. So I feel like you've almost kind of, you're one of those guys who's really good at pacing, like a Saticist, obviously, like a machine. Funnily enough, people don't really think of him much as a commentator, but when he does, he actually has incredible pacing. And obviously, many others do too. I don't mean to belittle anyone else. But those are just like the two that come to the top of my head when I think about pacing. And I think you're one of those same people. I think Harry and Scrawny are getting to that same level as well over time. I think that's something they've really. And I think that's like just an important idea of being a play-by-play caster is pacing. Like, that's like one of the most important things you must do.
Yeah.
So I think that's
basically what I said with the philosophy on casting is like pacing and tone shifts really important for me. Like, that's something I worked a lot on. But also, I feel like as a play-by-play caster, some people may just throw that into, oh, he can control his voice well and stuff. Well, it's not just that, though. You need to have a good grasp on how the game plays. If you don't know how the game is going to end up at the end of the round, if you don't have like a good read for what could potentially happen, you're not going to build the play up. Because you're not going to build a play up that you know is stone dead. If it's like a retake on Inferno or whatever, they take a site, the other players are saving. You're not going to build that up like it's the crescendo of a major final. You're going to be like, okay, this round's pretty much done. You pass it back over to your codecaster. You discuss things amongst yourselves. Whereas if you can foresee a position, like, for example, the best thing I could say about this, and you were there, you were sat next to me when it happened, is the Coldzera clutch.
Yeah, Mirage.
So I could foresee a way in which Coldzera could clutch that. That's why I started to build it up from the ground up, because I could see a way in which it could happen. If I assumed that round was just done, it would have almost caught me by surprise. You know what I mean? I'd have been like, oh, fuck, he got the, wow, okay. And then it would have come across nowhere near as powerful as it ended up being. Because if you build it up and you get to that crescendo, you get to that top spot, then people have been on the journey with you. You've built up their emotions, and it comes to a satisfying conclusion. If you're caught off guard because you don't have a good read of the game, it kind of comes across to the audience that you're not 100% invested in the game, or you don't really know what you're talking about. And that can be a real turn-off. And that's something that I think some casters struggle with. And for me, that's why pacing is such an integral part of play-by-play. If you're not good at pacing, you're not going to be a good play-by-play caster.
I think this is also an important point to make to, like, community members out there, maybe it's even to other upcoming casters to think about, is that I think people often assume either the community that's listening or maybe the casters themselves are naive enough to think this, that a play-by-play doesn't need game knowledge. That they just can focus on play-by-play, and that there's no need to... Obviously, the color commentator will focus more on the game knowledge and the strategy and things like that, but the play-by-play must have good understandings. That way, A, they can set up their color commentator with a good question or a good comment that they can build off of, or at the very least, not make a fucking stupid comment that is so factually not true that you've now fucked your co-caster from ever doing it, from ever being successful, because now they either must make the tough choice to correct you on air so that the accurate information gets out there, then they look like an asshole because they've basically been like, nope, actually everything you just said was totally wrong. Like, so, you know, it's one of those things where, you know, play-by-plays need to have good game knowledge so that they can understand what to look out for. Like, if you're a play-by-play and you know what position people like to play, then that can help you understand what's going to happen in the round so that you can do better play-by-play. So having game knowledge as a play-by-play is actually really important for your own play-by-play commentary and for setting up your color commentary. On the other hand, as a color commentator, you must understand play-by-play because A, you might get caught where you have to do some play-by-play. Like, maybe no matter how much foresight you might have into what's going on based on your previous experiences, you may fuck up and not pass your play-by-play fast enough to give them time. So you might need to do a little bit of play-by-play in transition to get your play-by-play back on board. So if I think that the crescendo's not going to hit for like another few seconds, I'm going to add a couple of quick notes here before I pass, like another quick important points. But all of a sudden, boom, kills start popping off, or like one kill happens, like one entry happens or something like that. You have to be able to play-by-play that for at least a couple of seconds. Otherwise, you're just cutting yourself off very robotically, and then your play-by-play comes in very robotically. There needs to be some type of smooth bridging that happens to make it sound better. So you might get caught having to do play-by-play, or we talked about this earlier, someone's coughing, needing to have a drink, needs to go use the bathroom, like something's happened. His mic doesn't work. You can't just color cast forever. Like, you have to do some type of play-by-play eventually. You can't color cast through and execute onto a bomb site while your play-by-play's mic isn't working. You see what I'm saying? So you have to do that, and you have to know when to pass. And the greatest way to know when to pass is understanding what your play-by-play wants and needs. So there has to be a lot of understanding back and forth between the two roles.
Sure, and this is something that people brought up when I was casting with Moses. I think it showed a little bit of naivety or just not really a solid knowledge of what we do. But I was purposely setting up Moses or asking him questions that were dumbed down to get him in the round. So I was asking him questions I already knew the answer to. People were like, wow, Vince knows nothing about CS. It's like, that's not the case.
Mate,
sometimes
yeah, exactly.
as a play-by-play, you need to set your color caster up to get into the rhythm of talking a little bit and kind of get their thoughts and their feelings. Because at the end of the day, if I'm with Moses, the guy's been there and done it multiple times. He's one of the best talent in any esport, in my opinion. The guy is insanely talented. Why the hell would I be making points about the game when I've got this guy next to me that knows everything? Of course I'm going to pass it to him. That's what people want to hear. They want to hear me do the hype moments and him kind of break down the game. So it's about introducing your color caster in, getting a bit more flow between the two commentators so it isn't robotic with like, I will take 40 seconds, then you will take 10, then I will take 40. Like, that's going to be boring after a couple of rounds. So there's a lot of different things that go into it. And yeah, I mean, that's something that people were saying, and I was a bit confused by it. It's like, do you really think that I'm at this position in my career where I don't know, like, fundamental basics of Counter-Strike? I wouldn't be here in the first place if that were true.
Yeah, that's definitely a good point to bring up. So yeah, it's definitely one of those things where you have to have a little bit of capability in both roles, because you may get paired up with someone at some point where you do have to kind of do the other role because they very clearly need to be doing a different role, right? So I think that comes into it. And I think some of it is also, for me, like, play-by-play commentators will always get remembered because that's what gets clipped and that's what gets spread around. Like, when someone makes a big play, the play-by-play is going to get remembered. As a color commentator, if you're trying to build your brand, you have to somewhat be remembered too. Like, you have to do something memorable. So sometimes you have to do a little bit of play-by-play to kind of be remembered, so to speak, or at least like let people kind of notice you and notice your ability. Also, you want to be a complete commentator. Like, you don't just want to pigeonhole yourself as like only capable of doing one very particular thing. Like, you need to have some ability to do other things, especially if you might transition into a new game or something like that. Especially for color casters, like, you're not going to be an expert in the next game that you go cast. So if you want to cast another game, you have to be able to kind of branch out a little bit and build up your skill set to do a little bit of play-by-play. So I think that that's also kind of an important thing to think about. And sometimes you need to do play-by-play around just to wake the fuck up. Like, maybe you're just kind of, not into it, and you need something to kind of get your adrenaline flow. And doing a little bit of play-by-play can sometimes kind of like help you get into the moment a little bit more and get a little bit more alive with your voice and things like that. And same for a play-by-play. Sometimes they need a moment just to kind of chill out a little bit. Maybe they just had like a crazy high and they need to kind of come down a little bit. I think that is where they can kind of start maybe being a little bit more color oriented to kind of make that come down happen so they can get back on pace where they need to be to build that next moment. So I think that's kind of the other way I kind of look at it. And maybe some new casters out there will find that useful, or maybe community people out there will kind of understand things a little bit better. Anything else you want to add before we move on to like our kind of final couple of topics?
Well, I was going to say that the prime example of that for me was when I was casting with you and the Cold Zero Clutch happened. And I put everything into that moment, like the man, the myth, the beast, where afterwards I was dizzy for about 30 seconds. Like, I was like, fuck, I blew my voice out, really. And I was just sat there, like, just trying to recoup. So you took over. So again, that's like a position where if you were just only color caster and that's it, it would be so awkward. The audience is like, well, why is he breaking down this play while 3 people have died? This is so weird. So yeah, you have, I think ultimately what it comes down to with casting is you have to be adaptive. You have to be versatile and flexible. You have to be able to step up in certain situations, out of your comfort zone. Not everything is going to be easy. Not everything is going to be straightforward. You have to be able to get up and do things on the fly without thinking about it too much, without like doubting yourself. That's where confidence also comes in. To believe that you have the ability and the talent to take that and run with it and have a good job and move on. Because then the broadcast looks good. You both look good. It's a win-win for everybody.
Also, anytime you hear a moment where a play-by-play commentator casts an absolutely incredible moment, take a second to realize that, and this is a little bit selfish, by the way, so I'll just fully admit this is kind of a biased comment, but I think there's some truth to it at least. Like, anytime you hear one of those moments, realize that they did have a co-commentator, and realize that that co-commentator was smart enough to give them that moment, or like understood how to set them up for that moment the seconds prior to them starting, and making sure that they got the mic to them to give them the time to build that moment up and not interrupt them in the middle of that moment. Like, there's a lot of skill that goes on as a color commentator to know when the fuck to hit your mute button so you can let your play-by-play do his thing, and vice versa. Like, if a play-by-play has a skill to know, hey, there's nothing that I can really do here that is valuable as a play-by-play, or maybe not valuable, but like, I know that my color can bring more value in this moment than I can because there's nothing really going on, and this is like a perfect moment for him to bring in some important information that will give you that extra context or that extra factoid that makes this a little bit more interesting, and maybe you learn a little bit more than you knew before, or something like that. So I think that that's something you always have to kind of think about when you're listening to commentary, is like the unsung hero co-caster who put them in place to do that. Not to take the credit away from the caster who made the moment, because they obviously did a fantastic job, but it could have easily been ruined if the color didn't pass to them in time, or if they interrupted them in the middle of it, or, you know, something like that, right? So there's a lot that goes on there as well. Now, this is like kind of one of our final topics. I know that this is going a while, but what's your thoughts on duoing, Vince? This is obviously a little bit awkward because I'm here and we've duoed.
Definitely not with you, Dust. Definitely not with you.
No,
well, the reason I already kind of spoiled it early, didn't I?
Yeah, but what I wanted to ask about this was because, and you've said this before, like, I feel like you've often said in videos that, like, you want a duo partner. Like eventually that's, like, your end goal is, like, you really feel like that's what held you back is, like, you don't have a duo. And I think that how I want to set this up for you to answer is, I feel like there's like pros and cons either direction. Because on the one hand, I could very easily say, if you had a set duo partner, then you never would have been able to set these opportunities to work with like Moses or Henry G at some of these really big events. So you might have held yourself back from some of these tier 1 opportunities that you've gotten if you were only willing to work with like one other person, right? But on the other hand, there is some advantage to working with one person, because maybe you get to build that rapport, you get to build that chemistry. So that means you're going to have better banter and better conversation back between you and your partner. Or you're going to have another person who's just invested as you are in your own success. That means that you're going to have someone who can give you some critique that's a peer instead of just relying on community critique. So there's definitely advantages and disadvantages, I feel like, to having a set duo partner. And I think that that's something you have to kind of wrestle with. And there's a couple other things that surround around doing, like the logistics of actually setting one up. Because I'll tell you this, like, if you're not one of the 3 big duos right now in CSGO, it's very hard to set a duo. Like, Scrawny and Launders have just done it. Like, they are the 4th group that's actually been able to consistently do it. I think Harry and Hugo maybe are trying to. I'm not 100% sure. I know that Harry's worked with some other people before working with Hugo, and Hugo's worked with other people. And like, it was like always Harry, Hugo, and Tom were like all kind of like a trio of people that were all kind of working together at different points in time. So I'm not 100% sure how that's going to pan out, or if that's what their goals are. I can't speak for them, but it does seem like Harry and Hugo have been working together a lot recently. It's very hard to do that, because what happens when a TO comes to someone and says, hey, we want to hire you, but we don't have room for the other person? Like, that means that your duo partner must either A, be willing to be okay with you taking an opportunity that leaves them behind, or you have to be willing to pass on an opportunity you've been given to try to hold on to your duo partner and kind of keep that brand, like unique or what have you, and like really focus on that particular brand and not focus on just yourself, right? So it can be very difficult because things can come into play that are out of your control, like budget, like if an NA and an EU guy are trying to work together, the budget of travel. It is actually quite difficult to make that work even if you wanted to. So this is where I'm going to turn it over to you and let you kind of talk about how you break down the pros and cons of being on your own, as you have been a lot over the years, or having a set duo partner, and kind of the pros and cons of that decision that you're trying to make and where you're at on it.
It's a question I've been asked a lot in the past as well from, again, like upcoming casters, whether they should focus more on solo or duos. And I can see the benefits and the drawback of both. So you kind of touched on one before. If I was in a set duo, and I mean, first off, it can be more flexible than that, where both duo parts of the duo accept that, you know, if an offer comes from one person, he can accept it and it's not going to cause derision or anything between the two of them. But being on your own does allow you the opportunity to take a lot more stuff. You know, you can be, like I have been most of my casting career, the guy that can work with anyone. Fit him in. If we need an extra caster, get Vince. If someone pulls out because of illness, get Vince, because he can work with Moses or Anders or whoever else. So that's definitely a huge benefit. But the downside is, I think once you get to a certain level, the solo aspect's all good for coming up, for getting exposure, for getting tier 3, tier 2 events. Once you get to tier 1 events, if you want to get in the position where I'm striving for, where instead of me being like 5th or 6th decision, I'm like 3rd or 4th or even 1st or 2nd, I think you need to have a duo partner. I think that's where it really steps up a great deal and where duo becomes a lot more important and much more of a viable decision to go for. Because then, as you said, you're more powerful as a duo, because if you're going to get hired by an event organizer, they know what they're getting. They've already seen it before. They know the chemistry's there. They know the synergy's there. They don't have to worry about, well, will this caster and this caster work together? They haven't worked together for like 2 years. Will it work? Will it be good? I'm not so sure. If it's like, let's say, for example, you and I get to a point where we're established, like, okay, we're getting Dust and Vince. We know what we're getting here. We know what the budget's going to be because they're asking for the same amount of money or whatever. So we can fit them in and we're good to go. That's a huge benefit. That's a huge bonus. But as you touched on, to get to that stage is really hard. And I think Launders and Scrawny got to this because Launders in particular is very, very good at networking. And I tip my hat to him. Like, he's super, super good at this aspect of things. And to get himself into like Blast, for example, and Starladder, this was huge for Scrawny and Launders. Like, this has really allowed them to start to establish themselves as a duo. Apart from that, though, I can't really think how you get yourself in right now. It's really tough.
Yeah, I think they did a good job of knowing that they had a couple events lined up together and then like kind of coming out and like announcing, hey, we are a duo. And then like they get those couple events together and then that like builds momentum. And then TOs now just kind of know, yep, all right, I know that I'm going to hire those two together if I'm going to hire them. And rather than...
But in that case, because Launders has like a decent social media presence and because he has more clout, it was easier for him to be like, look, I'm working with Scrawny, let's make this happen. And once they got the opportunities, and this is what I was saying before, once you get the opportunities, you've got to run with it. You've got to make the most of that chance and go forward. And this has been something I've been guilty of in the past, where I haven't networked or I haven't done the things I should have done, which is 100% on me. That's the thing. When I say Launders is great at networking, it's a compliment. I wish I was more like him. You know, I wish that I could be that good. But I'm not. It's a flaw in my character. It's a flaw in my personality. So I think right now, you and I, realistically, if you know, you're saying thoughts on duoing, so I'm going to take this a bit more broad and just be completely transparent. I think our best chance of getting a duo established is stuff like DreamHack Open event. Because first off, I already have a very good working relationship with them, so they'll come to me and ask, who do you want to work with some of the time? Not always, but sometimes they will. And so I can put your name forward, for example. Plus, I've worked their Masters events, so they know that I can do like the upper tier tournaments, so they can have a lot of trust in me. Plus, we've also worked together at more DreamHack Open events in the past, so we have sort of like a storied history with them. So under those circumstances, I think it's workable. But then you and I will have the issue of, okay, let's say that we do 3 or 4 open events this year, just pluck a number out of thin air, and we have a pretty good time of it and people are enjoying it. Well, then what do we do after that? Where do we go after the open events? What's the next rung on the ladder? Do we get to tier 1 events? If so, which ones? It's so difficult. Let's assume that Scrawny and Launders keep going forward in their momentum, which I have no reason to think they won't. You can have 4 duos to contend with. That's a very, very rough state of affairs to kind of get your foot in that door and really make it work. And that, in a nutshell, is the issue and the struggle of not only being a solo caster, but a duo caster too. It's like, how do you get your foot in that door? How do you get consistent work as a duo? Because if you're only going to take jobs as a duo, you're actually hindering yourself to some degree. If organizers come along and say, we can only get one of you in, we only want you, Vince, we only want you, Dust, then the other person's losing out. So it's a juggling act. It's a very, very difficult thing. Like, even though we've been talking about it, as I sit here, as much as I'm keen to definitely go for it, there is a huge question mark, right? There is a huge uncertainty as to will this actually be successful.
Yep, you can't like, I mean, you have to kind of luck out, get a few events together back to back, get some good response, and then like build that momentum, and then have TOs just kind of understand, okay, I realize that they're a package now. But the thing, like you said earlier, is at the same time you don't want to hold your partner back from opportunities, but and so there's gonna be no animosity. Like, you know, when that person goes off and does a gig. Like this happened in 2017 with us. Like we did a bunch of DreamHack Opens together, but then you got offered to go do Blast with Vendetta, I think it was, and DreamHack Winter with Vendetta. What am I supposed to do? Tell you not to go, right? Like that's fucked up. Like I can't hold you back. But you do have to realize that what you've done, the moment that that happens, you have kind of killed the duo in a degree. Not permanently, but now it's not in the mind of the community that you're a duo anymore because now they're seeing you work with somebody else. So in their mind, they're like, oh, that was kind of neat. I saw them cast a couple events together, but they weren't really a duo, right? Because now he's casting with this person and Dust is doing desk work over here, and it's not really a duo anymore. So I think that also plays into it as well. It's like this fine line you have to dance between, yeah, you don't want to have animosity or hold someone back, but at the same time, you have to understand that the effect you have caused by doing that also kind of starts to stop the duo being a thing in people's minds, especially at the very beginning. Like it's different now. Like give you an example. Like Sadakis is casting with Sponge at Starlight right now, but no one has any thought in their mind that Sato and Henry are no longer a duo. They probably understand that, hey, Henry's doing something else or not available, so Sato's casting with Sponge, and so that's just kind of a neat, you know, not necessarily a one-off. I think they've actually worked together before, but unless like something happens like later on down the line and actually Sato and Sponge do become a duo, it's very unlikely. But I'm just saying, like, from the knowledge that we have now, from the facts that we know, I doubt there's very many people out there who just now think that, oh, the Sato Henry duo must be dead, and now the new thing is Sato Sponge or something like that, right? But that's because they already have such a crazy track record of working together for many years that you just know that they're an item no matter what happens. Like Henry's done events with you, but I don't think there was ever a thought that Sadakis wouldn't make a return at some point and they would start working together again. So I think it's very important early on to really establish it. But then like later on, you're probably fine kind of, you know, going your separate ways sometimes or something like that.
Yeah, I mean, as you say, I worked with 2 Masters in a row with Henry and did the finals for both of them. I don't think anyone was like, oh, Vince and Henry are now a duo. It's like, no, everyone knew that I was temporary, makeshift, sort of stand-in replacement while Sadakis wasn't there. So, yeah, I get your point completely, but then it comes back to another thing that we talked about before, consistent work. If the duo is together and you're only working together and there aren't those organizers coming out to you and saying, we want to hire you for more events, what do? Do you sit there? Do you wait? Do you hope for the best and potentially lose out on a bunch of work and pay the bills? It's an incredibly difficult process. Like this is something that I've been hitting my head against the wall for the last 3 or 4 years. You know, is how does a duo work? How do you get it implemented? How do you push forward? Now, fortunately, because I've done 2 majors, although I only did 1 best of 3, obviously at the Face at London one and a couple of Masters, sure. I think I have a little bit more sway now or a little bit more pull. But even then, it's not enough to go to an organizer and be, yo, get Dustin with me if they're planning on having 2 duos and
or
like
else
Anders Moses. Yeah, exactly. Because then they're like,
or else we'll what? You won't get hired. Like,
yeah, we'll take the or else. Yeah, get fucked. You're not getting hired. You know, and then I'm like, fuck.
You can't do ultimatums.
Yeah, it's you can't do that.
It's not you can't have an ultimatum. You have to have them on board. Like their philosophy must sync up with yours. Like you must have the same idea. Like
right.
Know, so.
And that goes back to what I said, that I want to have a very good working relationship with all the orgs. Because I'm not a difficult person to work with. You know, if you hire me, you know what you're getting. I'm going to show up on time. I'm going to do my work to the best of my ability. And I'm going to go back to the hotel and chill. I'm not going to be an issue to anybody. I'm not going to kick up a fuss or stir shit or anything. I'm just going to do what I've been asked, and that's it. So it's important for me as well that I don't tread that line and start to even come across. And again, that's a confidence thing, right? I don't even come across as having diva-ish tendencies. I don't even come across as being difficult to work with.
Right.
Because that's a concern for me. That's the complete opposite person to who I want to be. Just in everyday life, never mind casting. I don't want to be the asshole that people look at and think, wow, he's such a knobhead, you know? But that's the thing with duoing. That's a really English phrase, sorry. That's the thing with duoing is it's one of the most difficult things to establish, I think, unless you have one person that is insanely established, like already in the top 6 casters, like somehow was already in a duo or whatever, like Anders and Moses. So for that, it was easy. Anders and Moses were already super known. To click together, of course, they're going to get hired. But you and I, we don't have that same pull. We're not even close to that same pull of level of either of us. So we can't say to organizers like E-League and, you know, ESL and Blast and all these other things like, yo, excuse me and Dust together, yeah, kick one of the other duos out, here we go. Like, they're going to be like, what the fuck are you talking about? We're not even hiring you in the first place.
It's either that or you have to people, like you said, Anders and Moses, who are on a very equal level of, like, popularity or brand size, something like that. So it's very easy. Whereas like in our situation, and this is like not me belittling myself, but being a little bit realistic, like your brand's obviously much bigger than mine in CS. Like you've done bigger events than me. Like you've done several tier 1 events. I've done basically 0 except for E-League Season 1. And so I think that you have a very positive community perception, but mine was very negative at one point, and now I think it's, I don't know, like neutral, slightly positive sometimes. So it's
I think
one of those.
you've got some people behind you now.
Yeah.
Like after the No Majors Club, I think a lot of people saw you in a different light, that you could take jokes and banter, and that's obviously really important. And then obviously, like, I've always known the whole time along that, first off, the community reaction to the whole Smith thing was unreal anyway. You never actually said Yole noob, as we've discussed many times, but you know, as you said, it's like a circle jerk comes in. But the thing is, you've just got to ride that wave out, and I think you have. I think you've got to a point now where there's still going to be idiots that hold on to the whole meme, or they kind of downvote your content because of what you said, however many years ago it was now. But you just got to keep plodding along and let your work do the talking for you.
So I guess the point I was going to make was just that people, if like say we did get announced as a duo and or whatever, I think people would be sold on like half of it right away. Like they'd be sold on the events part of it right away. Just based on the community reaction you've already garnered from like IEM Katowice and like the Face It Major and things of that nature. But people might not be as sold on me as they are you. Or they may even think to themselves like, oh, Dust is like below Vince's level. Like Vince should really be working with like, you know, like some other like big name former player, or you know, something like that. Like maybe it should be Vince and Sponge, or maybe it should be Vince and X, like whoever X might be, right? So I think that's like another issue trying to build a duo, is sometimes like it takes a little bit of time for the community to warm up to both sides of it. That they might be sold on half of it, but they might not be sold on the other half, and it might take a little bit of time to kind of sell them on the package as like a whole. And so I think that's like another hurdle that like we would face or something like that, right? Now I have the confidence now to be like, I don't give a fuck what you think. I know that I can like bring value to this duo. And Vince obviously does too. Otherwise he wouldn't choose to work with me. So I think that's like another thing that you have to think about as well and all that. Now I have one final topic, right? And then we'll wrap it up. Okay. I know it's getting a little bit late, but this is just like the thought of moving to another game, like bridging, like actually working in a different game. We've had several CSGO people do this. Whether it be through their content or actually being a talent, like on a live broadcast for a tournament. What are your thoughts on like moving to another game at some point in the future? Maybe not leaving CSGO behind like completely, but like just doing 2 games at the same time or something like that. Kind of like what Machine does, right? Like he hosted fucking League of Legends. Like he hosted like EU LEC or whatever it was. And he's done Dota 2 International. He obviously does a very big staple in CSGO. A couple other examples of this. I think it's a lot easier to do in hosting, obviously, than like commentary, particularly color commentary. It's almost impossible. So I'm just kind of curious, like, what are your thoughts on doing another game alongside CSGO, or maybe eventually moving on one day full time to another game, like similar, obviously, with Overwatch, or you know, and how difficult it is to actually make that transition, because you might be really well known in one game, but how do you get your foot in the door of another game that you have no history with? Like, how do you even get people to realize that you're interested in doing that next game? And how would you even get your foot in the door? Like, Blue's just done it with Rainbow Six, by the way. People might not even realize that, but like Blue's been doing a lot of Rainbow Six stuff, and was at their last major, I think, like their big major. He was actually at it. It was a big accomplishment for him in Rainbow Six, but it was really difficult for him to do. So yeah, kind of curious your thoughts on the next game or another game.
It's a difficult subject, because I have in the past, I would never fully leave CS to start off with. I love it far too much, and I enjoy it way too much to ever take a step back from. Just, I think in terms of esports, the best one to watch as far as I'm concerned, and by quite some way. But I would say that I have tried in the past, tried to dabble in Overwatch. I believe at one point you were interested in also maybe hopping on board that. Apex Legends is another one I was curious in. PUBG was another one. But the problem comes in, unless you have a bunch of contacts, which again, I'm terrible at networking, it's very hard to make the transition, because many other casters will have the same idea. So when I wanted to go across to Overwatch, I tried, but had a bunch of doors closed in my face. Same for PUBG, and same for Apex Legends. Like, I wouldn't even know where to go to start Apex Legends.
Because right now it's just all like random kill race tournaments that, there is no set Apex Legends casters yet. It's just other people from other battle royales, or like, you know, just general commentator, something like that. Yeah.
And even with PUBG, like, I got some contacts with their like esports division or something, and I reached out and just never heard anything. Not even like no thanks, or you know, we think you should brush up on this, or what. I just heard nothing at all. It was like radio silence. So
all the
it's very
while, the
difficult.
talent is establishing themselves in that game. So now breaking in just becomes exponentially harder as more time passes. Like if you're not on the ground floor, then it's not impossible, but it's much more difficult to get in. And then, you know, how do you get on the ground floor, right? Like those are definitely the two biggest ones. Or you get in the ground floor of a game that goes nowhere, and then it's like, all right, well, there's that.
It is a rough one because a lot of the casters are obviously vying for the top spot in that game, and so they're not going to help you out. And I completely understand that. So it's competitive again, as you highlighted. There's only a certain amount of slots, and a certain amount of casters can get in there. So I understand the whole debacle with it. It's just frustrating, and I'm not really sure how to get in there. I think for me personally, I'd probably have to build a much better brand and a bigger brand before I would have more clout and be able to say, like, further down the line, X, Y, or Z game, yo, I'm really interested in casting this. Can I get on board? And I have a bunch of people behind me that want to see me do that.
Being part of an agency probably helps, right? Like
that's maybe what agencies would also help. Yeah, but I think if you do more tier 1 events and more majors, that brings in more exposure. That gives you more weight behind you as a brand and you as a commentator, and then more people want to see you transition across. But as you also said, I think by far, if you do want to transition across to multiple games, hosting is definitely the way to go because it's a very transferable skill. Like, yeah, play-by-play is as well, but as we already talked about, you need a lot of game knowledge to do play-by-play properly. To be a host, yes, you need to know a little bit about the game, but by and large, you can lean on your analysts, you can lean on a lot of other people, and as long as you're a good host, you're good at asking questions, etc., like, you're going to be golden. Like, Machine's done a phenomenal job. He's done League, Dota, PUBG, I'm pretty sure he was also in, CS. Like, he can do pretty much anything stage, and he's highly in demand for that reason. Same with Shocks, same with other hosts as well. Like, they can transfer that skill no problem.
Golden Boy's on TV doing the Titan games on like a TV network, so he's one of the first esports guys that have really made that crazy leap to actually being part of like a whole different thing that isn't even esports anymore. So yeah, I think you're definitely right. Like, it does take a certain skill set to be able to transfer, and some positions are easier, others transfer, and then yeah, like networking, be on the ground floor, connections, you know, all that good stuff certainly all plays in. So Vince, we've had a long discussion here. It's been about 2.5 hours of talk. I think that maybe does it for now. Maybe we'll do another one in the future if there's like other topics people want to hear our thoughts on. I think that'd be like something neat to maybe do every now and then, kind of just come together and kind of talk about some topics the community is interested in hearing from us about, like the behind the scenes stuff, or just like our take on certain things, like the interaction between community and talent, and our interaction between talent and players, and talent and tournament organizers, and just different, like, let you kind of peek behind the curtain a little bit and kind of understand some of those things. So yeah, hope you enjoyed this too, Vince. Definitely glad to have you on and talk about it again. I'm not sure if this will become a regular thing or not, but it could. But I did want to sit down with Vince after the major, you know, after him kind of coming back to action, kind of talk about his history a little bit, talk about his philosophy on commentary, talk about some of the topics that I feel like we face as commentators that the community might be interested in, like community interaction, like consistency in work, duoing, you know, different things that come up. I figured maybe people would be interested in hearing about that. So hope you folks enjoyed it. If you did, please subscribe for more content. Vince, any closing thoughts before I wrap this baby up?
Cheers for getting me involved, and hopefully we're gonna kill it as a duo in the upcoming months and years.
There you go. All right, guys. So again, thanks so much for tuning in. Again, if you enjoyed it, please hit that like button, follow, subscribe for more content, and we'll see you next time.